everyone, and welcome back to the Under Men podcast. I am your host, Jack, and I am here with a friend of mine who I've been very excited to have on for a while, and I'm deeply grateful to you, Thomas, for making the time to do this. I know you are extremely busy as a husband, father, community leader, and you have a lot going on, so I'm very grateful that you carved out this chunk of time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thomas Barreiro is many things, and I'm going to give a brief professional introduction and then turn it over to him for the rest. But Thomas was the regional manager on the Canadian side for the Boys and Girls Clubs and led a number of different sites there, working with youth for many years, primarily Indigenous youth. Is that right?
Yeah, that was us, yeah.
And recently became the founder and director of Good Mind Grappling, where he and his brother are continuing that work of working with youth and training young people in their bodies and minds in healthy practices of engaging with one another and becoming physically capable and fit. Also, while Thomas is very specific and doesn't like me to overstate things, I think it's fair to say that you are a world-class wrestler. And you were 6-time Canadian national champion. You were the 2020 champion. You were on the Olympic team for Canada for a couple of years, but never ended up qualifying. So never actually went and became an Olympian, but were on the Canadian Olympic team a number of times and traveled extensively to train and do all sorts of incredible work around the world with wrestling. So truly an amazing person, and beyond that, an inspiring friend, father, and husband who I've had the honor of knowing for coming up on a decade now. We've known each other.
Yeah. Not terribly closely at first, but like you have touch points and you develop relationship over time.
Yeah. I've known your wife for longer than I've known you.
Well, she's how we connected, so that makes sense.
Our wives are friends, which is wonderful. So with that professional introduction, I'll turn it over to Thomas for if there's anything else you'd like to say to introduce yourself or let folks know who you are.
Yeah, I'm Thomas Barreiro. I'm Wolf Clan Mohawk from the community of Akwesasne. I've been working here in my home community since 2013. So over a decade of experience working with youth in our community, dealing with intergenerational trauma and various other issues that are impacting our youth. And during that time, I've also had a tangential career as a Canadian national champion and represented Canada at the World Championships, the Pan American Championships, the Pan American Games. Just going around trying to do the things I love, trying to be helpful to my community. So like that.
That's beautiful. I invited Thomas on this podcast for a variety of reasons, partially his brilliant leadership and work in community. Every time we talk, I feel like we find more points of connection where, for example, we both really love Paulo Freire and pedagogy of the oppressed and applying these liberatory approaches to working with youth in powerful ways. And you do that on the ground in a very real way. And one of the last conversations we had at a birthday party, we were recognizing that we both shared some experiences with being more called to right-wing and what's now called red pill ideologies when we were a little younger. And that took different forms for us. For me, I was more drawn to the Marine Corps, of all things. And part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is that I feel that I owe the red pill and incel community a little bit of an apology, because historically in my content, I've been pretty dismissive of that work and that community, especially the red pill community. And then recently I watched the new Manosphere documentary, and I've been doing a little bit of a deeper dive into that. And there are pieces in there that I think are important, especially about how they talk about how young men today are set up for failure and there are not good pathways forward for young men. And that there are systems above and influencing the lives of young men that are not healthy or constructive, and that those young men need to break out of in their minds and their communities in order to move forward in good ways. And we'll get to critiques of the red pill community as well. But I was somewhat surprised when I encountered those perspectives, because I strongly agree with them. While I disagree with maybe where they come from and what they are from some of those perspectives, that belief that, yeah, there are structural challenges to young men today, and we are not set up well for success, is still something that I think is true. And I understand, I think, a little better the appeal that those ideologies and those people saying these things have for young men, because most of the rest of the world tells us how privileged we are and how lucky we are to be men, and it doesn't feel that way. The lived experience of it is often more like, yeah, things are actually pretty rough. Things are not stacked in my favor, and there's not a lot of good pathways for us. And that I agree with and is true. And so I just wanted to name that, and also ask what your experience was. What appeals to you about the red pill community and the right wing community, and what were the strengths that you saw there, and what made you gravitate in that direction?
Well, my journey in that is pretty, like, I don't know if I want to say it's unique, but it's kind of like weird, because essentially, so I grew up, my parents were both in the American Indian movement. Like, that's how they met, is at Wounded Knee 73. And so I grew up, my father was Cuban, and he would tell me tales of like Jose Marti and Antonio Maceo and stuff about like the Cuban Revolution and all of those kinds of things. And so one of my formative experiences was I was like in third grade, and we had to make, it might have been a little earlier than that actually, but it was like a elementary school project. It was me, my brother, and one of our friends who was like a farmer kid from the local community. And we had to make like a fairy garden with its own system of government and all that. And so ours was a communist utopia. And so like it was great and all that. And then the next day this boy comes in and he goes, I'm sorry guys, my dad says I can't be a communist, And so it was like, I grew up with parents who were doing real activism and work in the community. My mom, she's an Aboriginal midwife, and she's delivered well over 200 babies, and she helped found the birthing center at Six Nations. And so we spent our I think it's because we redid third grade. We did third grade in Canada and in the US, because we were in Emily C. General Elementary School in Six Nations while she was doing that, right? It was like me, my brother, and our mom. And then my dad was still in New York with the other kids, and he was trying to get his PhD and all that kind of stuff. So I grew up with all that, I've been out to Pine Ridge. I've been spit on for being Native, you know what I mean? When I was like 14, we were out Sundance, and I was around Chadron and, around that area of the Dakotas, and some white kid spit on me, and I wanted to go in the bus and beat this kid up. And then my dad was like, you can't do that. You'll get in more trouble than is worth. So for me, my experience is that when I was younger, I was like put into lacrosse. Like lacrosse was like a huge thing in my community because that's our traditional sport. And I like hated lacrosse. I didn't want to do lacrosse. I wasn't good at it. Like I was on like the Onondaga Redhawks team. And if you know anything about lacrosse, you know who the Thompson brothers are. So I was like on the same team with like Miles and Lyle Thompson, and they're like some of the best lacrosse players in the world. But this is when we were kids, right? And I was like fourth or fifth string, but I was fourth or fifth string on like that team. And so maybe I was better than I thought I was, but like I wasn't good, And then we started wrestling, and we started doing wrestling because I'm from Akwesasne, but I grew up in Ithaca, New York, around Cornell University. My dad was working at Cornell, and so we went to schools in and around that area and experienced a ton of racism. Like I'd have kids pulling my hair, I'd have kids with various names. And so my brother and I got a reputation for like beating people up for being racist to us, So like there was a lot of these like country kids, like I hate to use the term, but hick kids who, they're like dairy farmers or whatever else who live on the outskirts of Ithaca. And because we got into fights with them all the time, there was like a begrudging respect, that my brother and I received around 7th and 8th grade. And then we got into wrestling because some kid was like, "Oh, hey, you guys are really tough. You should try wrestling." And so we did that. And my early experience was like really, really good with wrestling because the guy who was our original wrestling coach was he was a NCAA Division III national champion. So he was a damn good wrestler. He knew the sport. But more importantly, he was a special education teacher. He still is a special education teacher. So he's used to working with kids who aren't like, just like having everything going their way. Let's say that. And so to have those two things combined in a person for my brother and I, who at the time, like, I was like a kind of chunky, fat kid, I was like 170. And then by the time I like made the varsity team after 2 years of wrestling, I was at 152, So like I really fell in love with the sport. I fell in love with the coaching style there. And there was a lot of like work ethic instilled, and I kind of derived a sense of self-worth via my work ethic, But the problem is that in combat sports, there's like a underlying conservative culture. Like, you see that in the UFC, especially, like they're like literally having a UFC at the White House. You know what I mean? Like they've cozied up to the Trump administration like crazy. And you see it in the jiu-jitsu community, and man, the amount of like sexual assault and abuse in jiu-jitsu is like, it's ridiculous. It's pretty rampant. You know what I mean? Like even here, not in Akwesasne, but in the neighboring community of Cornwall, my brother and I used to go to a jiu-jitsu gym there to like teach wrestling on the Sundays. And then one of the black belts there was like teaching this 16-year-old girl. And then the moment she turned 18, they're like in a relationship, and he's like a 40-something-year-old man. Right. And so it, like all of the youth work that I'm in, I'm like, I can't be involved with this. Like it's not okay. I'm not okay with this. And so we no longer train there. It's hard. Like when you feel powerless to like impact that situation directly, but those things just happen in the jiu-jitsu community, and they can be kind of like, people acknowledge that and find it gross, but there's people just like don't care. You know what I mean? There's people who just don't care about that. And so for me, the biggest thing is that you are not immune to propaganda. None of us are immune to propaganda in small and in large ways. And so I wouldn't say that I was like involved in the red pill community until I got massively depressed. So like I had this like competing environments growing up with like radical activist parents and being in like a conservative wrestling culture. Like my college wrestling coach, man, around COVID, he like went deep into like QAnon and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like he got fired from his job, and he was divorced, and then he got like deeply into QAnon and like went a little bit off the deep end there, But it's kind of a cult situation where look what happened to him. He lost his job and he got divorced from his wife. And that's like, man, I wasn't like close to him at that time because I'd already graduated. I'd been out of university for like 7 years at that point, but following him on Facebook and all that, he's probably massively depressed. And so for me, that occurred for me in a way that impacted me was in 2015, my brother and I went to the Olympic trials for Canada, and we both made the finals. And then it's like a best 2 out of 3 matches, right? And so in the first match, and this is a guy that had beat the year before when it was like 1 match, right, to be Canadian champion. And so he beat me the first match like 3-2. And then the second match, I beat him 4-0. And then in the third match, I'm winning. I'm winning like 2-1, and there's like 30 seconds left. And I put my arm across his body, and he head and arm throws me. And I didn't get pinned or anything, but it put me behind. I couldn't come back from it. 30 seconds left. He was up by 3 points. So it was like I was this close that year, And then my brother did something real dumb where granted, is like he was cutting to 77 kilos. He was fighting at 80 kilos previously, right? Because that's like a non-Olympic weight. And then in the Olympic year, you got to go to 77 or 75, I think it was at the time. But he was walking around at about 196 pounds. And he had to make 165. And it was a day before weigh-in. So he cut like 30 pounds, He did like UFC fighter cut. And it was real bad. And the guy, he had also beaten that guy the year before, right? But at 80 kilograms, not at 77. And so he just he cut all this weight and he didn't have any energy left, right? Mm-hmm. So he lost to a guy that he probably shouldn't have lost to. So we both got terribly, terribly depressed going into 2016, like just real bad. Clearly like our relationship to the sport at that point wasn't like entirely healthy, or, he wouldn't get that depressed. But at that point, it was like that was going on simultaneously to the fact that my brother and I are both introverts, like we don't get out much. I don't drink. I don't use drugs or mind changers that way. So a little bit at that time, at least chronically online. And so we're like online, and you get the traditional Gamergate pipeline, that happened around 2015, 2016 prior to Trump, like all of these atheist creators, they become very like transphobic and very misogynistic, and the whole Anita Sarkeesian situation that occurred. I wasn't like part of any harassment, but I was watching like YouTube videos like this. Like there's this whole alt-right pipeline that happened on YouTube. And so then after the Olympic trials, I found this guy online named Jordan Peterson. And I was like, oh, and he was like this like self-help guru. And it's like in wrestling, because wrestling is weird, there is a lot of personal responsibility in terms of I'm going to train hard. And I'm going to do my best. I'm going to just do everything really, really hard. And it's still like a half truth and a lie, essentially, because the situation you're in really matters. You know what I mean? And I'll get to that in a second. But it's like, got into Jordan Peterson because he had like all of these things online about, like clean your room and and personal responsibility. And so I got into that. Through like 2016. And I really only got out of it fully because I met my wife. It was mostly just because I met my wife, and then the mode of being that I was embodying was not facilitative of maintaining a deep relationship with my wife. Like a lot of people, at least, and this is just watching it, like a lot of people, like young men have trouble engaging with the opposite gender, right? They just have a hard time with it. I didn't really have a hard time attracting women. You know what I mean? Like I had enough like relationships, but I never had a relationship that lasted more than 3 months. So the mode that I was inhabiting was not facilitative of deep, real connection. You know what I mean? So in inhabiting that relationship that I now have with my wife, we've been together almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years next year. Yeah, it wasn't suiting me or the needs of our relationship. So I had to like dive deep and change. And there were some formative things too, because, like Jordan Peterson's all about like the Bible. You know what I mean? These guys, like, they love to talk about the Bible. And then my father was like, why are we talking about the Bible? You got your own stories and your own traditions that you can draw inspiration from, and then he was right. And there's a lot of that I use now that I think is really important and really useful. And so what I see is that it's one of these things where it's like a half truth. It is true that systematically people are set up to fail. We live in a capitalist system that is set up so that dominant socioeconomic groups can take advantage. It's like people talk about, oh, like Elon Musk must work so hard. It's like, no, these guys are not special. Like they're not even, they don't even essentially necessarily work all of that hard. They are just in a situation that amplifies the work they do. They have like, it's like super amplified because they're exploitative. You don't become a billionaire without exploiting people. It's just not possible. It's not possible. And so what it is there's a system around us, an environmental system rooted in capitalism, rooted in settler colonialism that seeks to take advantage of people. And men especially are set up with this myth that we're supposed to be super tough guys, we're supposed to be exceptional, you're supposed to be a provider, you're supposed to be a warrior, you're supposed to be all of these traditionally masculine things. And so I wasn't like, I'm a combat athlete, you know what I mean? I wasn't suffering from that lack of masculinity.
Yeah.
Right. And my wrestling coach was an NCAA Division I champion. You know what I mean? He was not suffering from lack of traditional masculinity. The guy is a monstrous human being in terms of his ability to, like, his physicality. But in terms of his ability to maintain a marriage, in terms of his ability to hold down his job, it's clear that like these things don't actually serve men. So there's these systems that tell you do these things, you're going to have success and you're going to get what you want and it's going to be good. And then it's like a lie, it's like a lie. Like you look at why Donald Trump is president. It's like, well, he correctly, and the Republicans correctly point out that the Democrats like kind of suck. Their neoliberal policies aren't actually helping people. But the secret is that they suck way, way worse. They just convinced you that they're better. They don't actually, they're just willing to talk about it. They're willing to say there's a problem, but the solution they give isn't medicine, it's poison. And so that's what we encounter when talking about the red pill or manosphere or incel communities. It's people who are experiencing hardship that they didn't think they're supposed to experience, combined with all of the things in our social ecosystem that are creating loneliness and other negative outcomes. And then they're being told, well, if you're just a little more misogynist, well, if you just if you just go lift weights, if you just but it's like, yeah, like if you because when you go on some of those sites or whatever, they're like, okay, well, dress better. Here's how you dress better. It's like, well, yeah, like if you dress better and take care of your appearance, you are going to attract more attention, right? Like that's just that's just super obvious.
Yeah.
Right. But like I said, for me, I wasn't an unattractive guy. I was big, I was strong, but I could only maintain a relationship for like 3 months max. Often 2 weeks. So it's like you'll attract women, but you're not going to have a relationship, right? You're not going to be able to have a relationship, not a healthy one, because healthy relationships are a lot of work. They're a lot of work. They're a lot of self-awareness, a lot of realizing, hey, this part of me kind of sucks and I got to change it.
Yeah.
Right? So, and for me, it was like, I was still struggling because in our community up the river, there's an EPA Superfund site from Alcoa and General Motors. They polluted the river. And so there's a lot of endocrine disruptors in the St. Lawrence River. And so for me, I don't have a functional thyroid gland, right? In university, my thyroid went haywire. I have to take medication every day for that. Going through that left me with some medical trauma. And I've had a hard time navigating my anger, navigating and managing my anger to this day, where I still work on that, And it's one of those things where it's like dominance and anger and these are the things that are acceptable as displays of masculinity for men.
Yeah.
you know, as just being harder. You know what I mean? You get like David Goggins guy, who's like, I don't know if you know him.
No.
He's like a manosphere type dude who's like a ultra marathon runner or something. There's like this meme where like he's like, it's like homoerotic. He's like, I want to be around the men, the hardest of the hard men, and we'll all just be together. And it's like, and like even that critique of it is a little bit like homophobic, right? But it's like it's funny is because that's what these people are. You go to the gym, you get big muscles, you don't really impress women, or you impress other men. You impress other men because they're all vying to be traditionally this masculine ideal. And there's a lot of men and boys who don't really fit, or they fall short of it in an aspect, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I'm like 5'6", and I compete at 214 pounds. Yeah, I'm like big and strong, but like I'm very, very short. So like, very, very short, like whatever. But like traditionally masculine men are big, strong, tall. Like they're just like these like it's almost like Aryan race type stuff, like eugenics-y type thinking, And so you get men who are like, they're not ugly, but they think that they can't attract women at all. And it's like, well, yeah, because you can't think of them as human beings. So why would they want to be around you if you can't treat them like a human being? So in terms of like the manosphere and right-wing stuff, in 2016, I didn't actually vote in the election in 2016, but I do remember myself thinking, man, if I were to vote, I would have voted for Trump, Because Hillary Clinton sucks. And it's like, yeah, like they did correctly assess that the Clintons aren't actually good for people, but Trump is like way, way worse, So the thing is like, you are like, no matter who you are, no matter how intelligent you are not immune to propaganda. It's just you just aren't. And the environment you're in really shapes who you are, and you got to be intentional about that and think about, why do I think the things that I think, and is the way that I'm embodying, are the things that I'm embodying actually facilitated for me? So for me, that's what was useful about it. Was like, I got super depressed and I thought this was the way out of it,
So
and it wasn't actually.
I had a question about that. I mean, I have a bunch of questions, but
Yeah.
what about it felt like a pathway out of depression? When you were in that depressed state after you and your brother lost to those guys you beat the year before, and you felt like you weren't living up to your standards, or it wasn't the life that you were hoping you'd be living in that moment. You're depressed, you're all kinds of messed up. Something appealed to you in that right wing, in that red pill ideology. And I wonder what that was, or if you could speak to that a little more.
So this gets to the culture, like just the culture of wrestling in the United States. Okay. Which is like, in certain ways is healing, but in other ways it's a lot of the dominant culture in American wrestling is based in trauma. So there's this guy named Dan Gable. I don't know if you know who that is, but he's he wrestled for Iowa. He's an Olympic champion. Dan Gable is the most successful. Well, he's no longer, because now the current Penn State team is like just insane. But in the 90s and 2000s, the late 80s as well, for about 15 years, they were like, Iowa wrestling was like the best team in the country, and they were just super dominant. There was just no beating Iowa. And Dan Gable, all of his like philosophy, and I'm sure it changed as he got older, but the way I see it is that philosophy all comes out of a trauma response. So when Dan Gable, and we're going to just trigger warning here, it's going to get pretty dark for a second. We're going to talk about trauma a lot today. So trigger warning for, those kinds of factors. But Dan Gable grew up in Iowa, and he had a sister. He had an older sister, and the whole family went on a family trip. And then a neighbor boy raped and murdered Dan Gable's sister. Right? His sister was raped and murdered. And so in order to deal with that, he dove himself into training like super, super hard, just training, like there's like a quote where he's like, I wake up at 2 a.m. and I train so that I know that the Russians on the other side of the world, they're not getting extra training on me. You know what I mean? Like he was just like this hardcore dude. And at the time, he instilled that in Iowa wrestling. And then they were like just ridiculous good at wrestling. And it's like, yeah, because nobody at that time knew how to train, right? And so they had outsized success. But those guys, their body is destroyed, like Dan Gable's body is destroyed now, it's like, it's hard. And I know that he probably, like, as he grew, he probably like came out of that a bit, talked about the beauty of like Russians and their technical style. But then you have, and so that's like when I was coming up in wrestling around 2003 to 2008, all the way through 2013, graduate university 2013, wrestled Division One. That was the thing. People were like, you just work really hard. You just work really hard. You just outwork people. You just, pain is weakness leaving the body, those kinds of thoughts and things. And there's like a half truth to that, because you have to be dedicated to your craft. If you want to be successful, you have to be dedicated to your craft.
Yeah.
But so it's like intertwined with this like individual responsibility, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like these two things are compatible, right? And so when I was in 2015, I lost the 2016 trials, and I was like, I'm just not working hard enough. Clearly, I'm just not working hard enough. You know what I mean? Like I just must not be working hard enough. And so it fit with this other propaganda that was already in my brain, that even though I grew up in this family of activists, that it's like, that's just the American culture. That's just what in North America and Canada, but especially in the US, that's just everywhere. And it's impossible to avoid that, because that's the top-down programming, right?
Yeah.
So these two things were compatible. It made sense to me because of that previous stuff. But it's not actually, it's only half true, right? It's only half true, because you can work as hard as you can and still not succeed, because you don't have the system around you to support you.
Yeah.
Right? So in wrestling, strategically, there's like a million different positions, but often the best wrestlers they'll be good at like pretty much everything, but they'll be exceptional in like one or two positions, and they'll funnel the match always to one or two positions. You got Jordan Burroughs, who's like the best of all time. He always funnels it to a double leg. You get the Iranian team, who are like some of the best wrestlers in the world. They all go directly to their underhook and they fight from there. They don't fight from 2-on-1. They don't fight from other places. They try to make, they will if they have to, but they make the situation fit their skill set. And so a lot of it is understanding the environmental factors around outcomes, right? Where as an individual, yeah, I'm an individual, but I'm also part of a community that impacts me, and I impact the community. We're all part of an ecosystem. And so the lie that you get from conservative, right-wing, red pill, manosphere type things is this idea that we're not part of a community, right? Even though at the same time they're like creating community for lonely men, in a way that's like harmful for them. Like it's like one of those things where like something can be actively harmful for you, but if that's your only community, you're gonna like fight tooth and nail to defend it. So that's why I kind of like equate it to cults, because that's the tactic used. Is people are suffering, and we're going to use that suffering in kind of a cynical way, where we're going to take advantage and make them suit our ends, right? So it's just exploitation and trying to use that to further leverage their own power. So that's kind of what I see, and kind of what I, as a younger man, fell for is that myth of, oh, it's not like You're not simultaneously, you are the problem and you need to be better, but you're also not the problem. It's these other people, it's women, or it's LGBTQ, or it's trans people, or it's foreigners, And so maybe if I wasn't indigenous, and definitely if I had never met my wife, it would have taken me a longer time to get out of that. And my wife is a former Canadian Armed Forces member, she's tough, like when there's something to be done around the house, handiwork, carpentry, like she's the one that does it, I'm good at the things I'm good at, and she's good at the things she's good at, so it's like, and like being like, even just being willing to be like, okay, I'm not good at everything, I'm not like the dominant dude in the carpentry room, I'm not the dominant dude when it comes to like figuring out how these lights work. It's like, I'm pretty damn good at wrestling, and I'm pretty good at working with kids, and I have a decent understanding of my culture. And so I'm just trying to learn and do the best I can. And so it's one of those things where it's like, you got to set up the situation, right? You got to set up the situation around yourself. And so what I'm trying to do through the work that I currently do, which is provide opportunities for athletics to at-risk and wounded youth, is I'm trying to change the situation in my community. Yeah. I'm trying to influence that. They get resources that I never had access to as a young kid. Like my brother, when we were in high school, he took third in the state in freestyle and qualified for Fargo. And if you know wrestling, that Fargo is like the national championship for freestyle for teenagers. But we couldn't go. We didn't have money. We didn't have money to go. You know what I mean? So we're like, I want to make sure that happens. It's weird because I was already doing this work in tandem that I was fighting with this, it's like been a weird meld of it, Mm-hmm. It's been a weird meld of it. I've been working with kids in the community that way ever since I got home in 2013. So kind of what happened in a long but not complete version of it.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. And your description of that lie, that half-truth in the red pill community is powerful. The thing that's standing out to me right now is how, there's a lot of truth in their critiques of the system that sets men up for failure and doesn't give men good opportunities, and then doesn't give men pathways when we feel struggles, when things aren't going the way that we wish they were. But there's almost there's a certain irony to it, because their response to that is entirely individualistic. They say there's this structural form of oppression that's preventing us from succeeding right now, and you have to break your mindset out of that in order to succeed. But the advice they give to break your mindset out of that is more individualism. You just need to work harder. You need to train more. You need to be able to get yourself really fit or rich or whatever it is. And there is no amount of individual work that can solve structural problems. And that's the piece that I hear you speaking to. And your examples of these other teams, the Iranian team, and I've forgotten the other one, who are creating the circumstances of their own success, where they're saying, oh, well, I know that from this hold, I'll be able to win more, so I'm going to create this hold. And there's an irony with the red pill community not understanding this about combat sports, because they are continuing to see, we're in this trap. This thing isn't working for us, but we're going to give all of this advice that just puts you into the worst possible position again in this trap. It's just like giving your opponent your full neck over and over and over again and saying, yeah, sure, just here, put me in this absolute position that I can't escape from, because that is what creates the reinforcing community of what you're describing as that cult. If there was actually a pathway out of those struggles, that wouldn't make money. It would just be as simple as, hey, when you find community, when you find these other holds that allow you to fight in a way that you win, then you don't need this depressive, addictive cult anymore. But it's only when they reinforce losing and continuing to feel oppressed and victimized that they continue to have traction. Does that resonate with your experience, or what do you think of that framing?
Yeah, yeah. Again, it's all about understanding environmental factors and that you are part of the environment that you're in,
Yeah.
right? So it's like it's easier coming from an indigenous worldview because Western worldviews are very individualistic, and in an indigenous worldview, everything's alive, right? Like everything has a spirit, so it has some value intrinsic to it. You know, like this computer I'm talking to you on, it has wants and needs and feelings spiritually. You know, so it's like, how do these things impact each other, and how do we set each other up for success, right? Because one of the tools of like Western hegemony, capitalism, as I understand it, you know, I'm not a scholar or anything, is just alienation, being disconnected from one another. It's like we have 9-year-old kids and they're like addicted to their phones, or like teenagers and adults and they're addicted to their phones. Like, oh, why is everybody addicted to their phone? I don't understand this. Like, it's a failure of the youth. And it's like, well, you know, there's like billion-dollar industries whose job it is to make sure that those kids are addicted to their phones, and they figured out how to do like intermittent dopamine reinforcement so that people stay there. Like these are not people who are failing. These are addicts. People are addicted, you know, and like I find myself addicted. Everybody has this struggle because that's like literally, oh man, it's like, I don't know if you know who like Bo Burnham is. He did like he's like
Yeah.
I was like a really good like interview with him. It was like I think it was like a 2012 interview I saw of him. He's like, yeah, you know, like they want to like colonize all this and that, and they colonize the world, and now they're trying to colonize our attention span. It's like, yeah, it's like that's what they're doing. That's what they're trying to do, is take all of our attention and all of our time and all of our presence, you know, so that we can't show up for one another. And if we can't show up for one another, how do we win? How do you win as a community if you can't show up for each other and build trust and build coalitions? And, you know, like it's like community is like the biggest thing. Humans are social animals and we need community. And so the right wing red pill type spaces, they give shallow answers and they give a sense of community, and they have an enemy that the whole community can rally against. And that's why everybody's like, oh, politics is sports teams now. It's like, well, yeah, that's true. So yeah, that does resonate with me. And I think that in coming out of that, it's a lot of like, you want to understand this stuff, you know, I'm sure there's more to understand than I do, but a lot of it is understanding trauma and understanding how cycles of trauma create the situation we're in, you know, and maybe hopefully can give us a way out, you know. And obviously it's not like we can just vote our way out, you know. We gotta like, there's gotta be power building in various ways and resistance in various ways. And people are frustrated, you know, like these Democrats, they don't, it's like they're allergic to leverage, you know.
Yeah.
Like they're allergic to like doing anything. And so it's like, man, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but it's like the more this Trump stuff goes on, the more I'm like, oh, it's kind of like controlled opposition.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
and I don't know how much of that is true or just my feeling, but we need leadership and building community to fight this kind of stuff. So
I wanted to ask more, because you mentioned two of the pathways that you found away from that. So you, and you know, I'm 14 years clean and sober. I spent a decade in a bottle with hard drugs. So addiction and recovery work is very near and dear to my heart. And I agree with you. This is very much an addiction that we're navigating. Screens and philosophies. You found a pathway out of that. And the two aspects of that you mentioned were your father saying, hey, you know, we have our own teachings, right? Have you looked at your own teachings? And your wife. And I'd love to hear more about both of those. Maybe let's start with your wife. What was incompatible for you with the philosophy that you held at that point in time and the relationship that you wanted and the relationship that you now have?
I was not able to see her as a human being at that time. Right? So like in our way, in order to say the word I love you, we say ganalunkwa. Ganalunkwa. That's the word for in Mohawk, that's the word for I love you. But the way that I've been told from my elders and my mom and others is like the actual like translation is more like I understand you, I see you for what you are, and I accept you. Right? It's more like you have to understand that like if you love something, you need to understand it fully. All the good parts and all the bad parts. And when you enter a relationship, it's very hard to like understand someone because you don't have the time with them already yet. And so it's easy to have like this like phase where like they're just perfect, in your mind. And then you treat them in certain ways and then like, like you haven't shown each other the ugly parts of you yet. And so for me and her, it was like I was like literally getting like dating advice on like how you're supposed to navigate women from the Red Pill Reddit. So I was like doing and saying stuff that was like completely damn cringy, like super cringy. Right. And then like, I think there was this one where I was like, oh, I'm looking for like a first mate. I'm looking for a first mate. I want to be the captain and she's the first mate. And my wife was like, that like puts me under you, right? Like I'm your underling in that circumstance. And I was like, yeah, you're kind of right. And she's like, I have my own thoughts and feelings and things that I want to accomplish and ways that I want to actualize myself. And so we have to navigate that together, not you get to tell me what to do and then I follow along. It's like stuff that like that sounds beautiful if you read it and don't think about it too hard. Like, oh, I want to be the captain of the ship and then somebody's going to be a partner and they're going to help me. And it's like, no, man, like they don't work for you. They don't work for you. They work with you. It's like that, that's the main thing. And there's a lot of little things there and her helping me learn to become more self-aware. I'm like very inside of myself a lot of times. I have a mom who's like, she has a hard time hearing, right? She's deaf. She has hearing aids and all that because when she was young, she had an infection and XYZ. So she would often be like inside her own world. And so I had like a learned behavior from that. I notice it in a lot of my family that like a lot of us are very like inside ourselves a lot, like internal. And so I'm not as aware of the people around me and their needs as I could be.
Mm.
I'm not as present as I could be because of that. And so that's a constant struggle. And I fail at that like all the time. But that's something that I've been learning and growing from, to consider the needs of others and how like, be a little bit less selfish, and it's one of those things too. Like when you're in high level athletics and you're training to compete and training to be like the best at something, there's a level of selfishness that is necessitated. You have to put yourself first in some circumstances. Right. And so it's hard to like coach and train at the same time because a good coach is on a spectrum selfless. They're focused on like, there's still a relationship, you got to like, the danger in coaching is being too selfless. And then if you're really selfish as a coach, well, you suck. You're a terrible coach. Like you're doing it for your own ego. Because coaching is a relationship where you're helping somebody else get better. So it's like navigating relationships and understanding the nature of your relationship to another person and what is and isn't reasonable in that relationship. And I think just a lot of that has been very helpful in terms of my partnering with her. Because, like when I met her, she was in her healing journey from the stuff that she encountered in her life. And, she's got her own stuff that she deals with. but it's like committing to always trying to improve together and to giving each other space, to like just holding space for when we both like are not well, you know? And she's just better emotionally regulated than I am. So she holds more space than me. And sometimes she needs space to be held that I just like am not aware enough. And it sucks. And it's like things I gotta work on that way. So it's less easy to talk about because it's less formal. You
Yeah.
know, it's very like in the doing with her, in the doing, you know,
It's
which I guess is it's more powerful that way, but it's harder to like explain because it's an embodied kind of learning because you're doing it as you're navigating the relationship.
yeah. It is funny knowing your wife, and she is just an extremely powerful person. Like you mentioned, she's a vet, and just very strong. And it's funny to imagine those conversations between younger you and her. But one thing that stands out to me is how you were able to hear her, and you were able to hear her voice above what you were hearing on Red Pill Reddits. And I wonder why. What made your ears open to your wife? Because I know that a lot of men in that same situation would say, well, she doesn't understand gender relationships. She must be wrong because this is the way the world works over here. But you were able to say, this is how I'm operating. This person I love is saying something different, and you moved closer to her. And I wonder why were you able to hear that and move that way?
I'm not actually entirely sure off of the top of my head. You know, we broke up twice. You know, like we broke up twice in that, and there was like a whole like 8 months where we were just not together. So it's like it's not like it's just been like ooh hunky dory and everything's good, you know. And then even in our marriage, you know, like we have times where we struggle, you know, and we got to work through it. But
I remember that. I knew her then, and I remember her being like, yeah, Thomas is taking some time and figuring his shit out, and maybe he will and maybe he won't. And then a year later, y'all were back together and things were like really solid.
yeah,
And I was really happy for both of you. But I wonder what were you doing for that 8 months? What was that time like?
I don't know. It was weird. It was weird. I don't want to like. It's one of those things where like in a public forum, I don't want to do. I don't want to like put all of my relationship out there. You know what I
Of
mean?
course. Yeah, yeah. Whatever you
Especially
feel
like
comfortable.
doing that. But like, I was just trying to figure out what I really wanted in life. You know what I mean? And like where my priorities were. Because and part of it is like also becoming more of an individual and being like less afraid of change. You know what I mean? Or like I was very like I'm a twin. I'm a twin, so I have two deep relationships in my life. I have my twin brother, who I've been in a relationship with for 30, almost 37 years now. It'll be 37 years in September.
Mhm.
And my wife, who I've been in a relationship for 10 years. And so at that time, my brother and I were very like codependent, I would
Mhm.
say. I would say we're very codependent. You know, like we had to do things, we did things for each other, but like combined, we got things done. And there's always like a fear of like leaving your brother behind, you know, or a fear of like, well, can I do this or that? Or like, can I really trust this person fully with like the rest of my life, you know? Um, and it was a like, like literally the thing about guys like Jordan Peterson and red pill people is like, again, they have like a grain of truth that like is helpful, like a grain of it. And so like the one thing I did through Jordan Peterson that was like actually very helpful was like his future authoring program, which is literally just goal setting. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, who would have thought goal setting or taking the time to think about what are the things I want and then unapologetically going for those things
Mhm.
would be helpful. Like who would have thunk, you know, like you gotta be a deep philosopher to think about goal setting, you know? And so I did. I was like, okay, 5 years ahead. What do I want to do? What do I want to be? How do I want to be? I want to have a family, and I want to have a home, and I want this and that, and I want children. And I also want to like make an Olympics. And you know what I mean? And it's like, and the thing is that those two goals, they can be compatible, but not like 100% compatible. You know what I mean? It was just, I was deeply in love with her, but I didn't know how to be with her. You know what I mean? I was like
Yeah.
deeply in love with her, but I didn't know how to be with her. And I was still just like so god dang angry all the time for inexplicable reasons. It's just coming to grips with that. And in terms of what made me be able to listen to her and not the propaganda stuff, it's like, I don't know. I almost want to be like, I don't know. It's just like I had such a, I don't know. I don't actually know. I want to be like, yeah, it's because we were spending more time together and less time online. You know, it's like, well, I don't know. I don't actually know. I don't really know. Maybe it's something just about how she is and how she communicates and all of that. She's a highly emotionally intelligent and empathetic person.
Yeah.
And she's very quickly able to read a room, you know? And so she's able to like, you know, and some of that's a response to things that happen in her life so she has these skills, and they're sometimes good and sometimes bad, but it's some variety of factors in that. And I don't actually know. I don't actually have the answer for you there. I'm sorry.
No, your answer was beautiful, and it stands out to me how you're using similar language to some of the red pill content, where what you just said, what I heard was you mentioning a claiming of your individuality, and how that led you to be able to hear more in a way, which is funny because these red pill influencers are saying you need to be an individual, you need to think for yourself, break out of these systems that are controlling you. But that in itself was a system that is controlling men, and it took you finding your individuality to break out of that system and make your way over to the beautiful relationship that you have now.
Yeah, people are very scared to. This happens in wrestling and in jiu-jitsu and grappling sports all the time. Is you'll be training with somebody, and this is something that happens to me a lot because I've been training for almost 25 years, right? So like I'm very, very, very good at what I do. So I'll often be training with people and they'll be like, what am I doing wrong? What did I do wrong? And it's like, to begin to break that down would require like 3 hours. And you don't really want me to tell you what you're doing wrong. They don't actually want you to tell them what they're doing wrong. They want you to give them the secret answer.
Yeah.
Because they're not trying to self-reflect. And I've done that too. I had one where I was in my junior year of university, and my teammate and now at that time coach Kyle Borshoff, I was like, what do I got to do, Kyle? And he was like, there's no secret pill, man. You just got to like do your best. it's like that. It's like they're like, oh, you got to like think for yourself, and it's like, but you're letting Jordan Peterson, or you're letting Andrew Tate, or you're letting whoever the grifter du jour is that's do your thinking for you and telling you what to think. You know, yeah. And so, but it's insidious because they're being like, we're philosopher guys. You know, like I got really into stoicism for a while. Yeah. It's weird because that's the one that I was talking to my dad about Stoics, and he was like, why, who cares about Marcus Aurelius? Think about the Peacemaker, you know, like who cares about what this guy had to say, you know? And so like, but it's like some of those things are like, it's like there is some beauty in that and there is some good in that, but it's like you're not really engaging deeply with the original text and a thought in a way that's like actually deep. You're only learning it through some psychology professor who hates trans people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's funny you mentioned Marcus Aurelius. I loved him when I was 17 and wanted to join the Marine Corps. Yeah. I thought he was the most profound. Exactly. And you're right. There is some wisdom. It's a beautiful book. And I mostly loved it because it meant I didn't have to talk that much and I looked really profound.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it's like, oh man. And there's some kernels of that are true and good. And when I compare them to the thought processes of our traditional teachings, I'm like, yeah, I can see where these things are like intertwined, but you got to be aware, like Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor. right? Like this was not a necessarily a good human being who was community minded and cared about the people around him. This is a guy who was, like we're still dealing with the outfall of the Roman Empire as it expresses itself through Great Britain and through the United States now. This is just a continuation of Western hegemony that hasn't really been pro human thriving.
No,
It's not pro human community.
He was a brutal war leader who is part of the empire that crushed my indigenous ancestors, the Celts, under the boot heel of colonization in a way that we've never recovered from. So Marcus Aurelius was a really weird guy for me to idealize.
Yes, exactly. And so it's like, yeah. And I remember in like 2017 going to Pans, and I'm like thinking about like this, like I'm training and I'm like getting ready, and my pre-match self-talk was like, okay, I'm gonna like do stoic virtues, I'm gonna do this. And it's like that doesn't have anything to do with Greco-Roman wrestling. You know what I mean? It wasn't facilitated in any way, shape, or form. But it was like it's just super cringy stuff, like it feels cringe to talk about, right? Because it's like here's all the dumb stuff I did when I was younger. Yeah. And it's like, but it's like, it's very important to understand that like whoever you are, watcher, me, Jack, you are not immune to propaganda. You're just not. Yeah. Right? Like they wouldn't have marketing teams. They wouldn't have like a whole academic discipline if it didn't work. I still have it in my head. I used to drive to Montreal 4 times a week. And you'll have the triple mint gum commercial that you get from Inside Out. For me, it's like this pizza delivery service where it goes 3430343, double your pizza, and then it goes in French. It goes double a pizza, double. And my wife hates it. Like I sometimes I'm just washing the dishes and I sing this, and she's like, "See, but now I have it." I'm like, "Well, yeah, they did a really good job with their marketing." Like I have that in my brain, like almost 8 years later. You know what I mean? They might have gone under. Who knows? But marketing and propaganda and manufactured consent, all that kind of stuff, that's all real, and it impacts our communities in intentional ways.
Yeah. And speaking of impacting communities, that's a really good segue to start talking about where your father pointed you. You mentioned your father pointing you towards your own culture's teachings, and you mentioned the Peacemaker, and you generously have offered to share that story with us today, which means a lot to me. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy is, in my opinion, the single best example of long-term ecologically stable governance that I've ever seen in the history of the world. It held multiple millennia of multinational, ecologically sane, healthy community across many nations. And that is incredible. For listeners who don't know, everything good about the U.S. Constitution was stolen directly from the Great Law of Peace, the Haudenosaunee laws. And some of the founding fathers, Ben Franklin, spent a bunch of time over there, deceptively said to the Haudenosaunee that they wanted a contract like the Great Law of Peace, took the parts that looked appealing to them, cut out all the parts that made it matriarchal and egalitarian, and made this really watered down colonial version that is the US Constitution. So the Haudenosaunee foundational documents and structures of government, everything good in the US governance systems was stolen from the Haudenosaunee. And this story is one that I've heard a number of times, and every time it's incredibly powerful to me. And I'm also aware that in colonial culture, we suck at listening and we don't understand what stories are. And so I wondered if, before you shared this story, which as I've been told or understand it, is pretty foundational to the Great Law of Peace and sort of where the Great Law of Peace came from, if you had any advice for listeners on how to listen to this, on how to use their ears to hear what you're about to share.
Well, The first thing is that I'm not going to be able to tell the entire Peacemaker story because, one, I don't actually know the entire Peacemaker story. And in order to properly tell the Peacemaker story, sometimes it takes like multiple days for people to tell the entire Peacemaker story. Be able to do in the context of this podcast is give you guys like a Cliff's Notes version in terms of like listening and hearing it. Really, a lot of it is like, I don't have a terribly good answer for that off the top of my head. But if I had to answer, which I'm going to, I think it's like, it's something about like just trying to seek to understand before you try to like for yourself. Because there are things to take from it for yourself and how you use it. Because it's teachings, it's lessons, it's yeah, just try to like understand it, you know, try to like actually be present. Because a lot of like it's very similar, like a lot of times where we're talking and I'm not really listening to what you're saying, I'm just waiting to respond. You know, I'm like waiting to respond. It's just active listening, really.
Yeah.
I'm sure others who are like actually storytellers would be able to have a better answer for that. But really, that's the best I can do for you today. Is that.
Yeah.
But it's important. It's important because the story of the Peacemaker, of the founding of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, comes out of a deep understanding of trauma. A deep, deep understanding of trauma. Like our people, like we understood trauma. Like, holy heck, man. Like the way that we understood trauma and dealt with trauma was like insane. And so for me, again, it was like I was talking to my dad and I was like, oh yeah, and this guy, Marcus Aurelius, and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you know, you should really read Collective Call to Consciousness by John Mohawk. You know, like, why don't you look at like some of our Seneca intellectuals? Look at him, look at John Mohawk. And so I looked at John Mohawk and he's like, oh, like the stories that we have and the way that we already comport ourselves, because we're very intelligent, deep thinking people, you know, a long oral tradition. And it's not unique to the Haudenosaunee people. We just happened to, compared to some other communities, be more resilient or maybe received somewhat less repression or something, you know, but it survived longer. But really it comes out of a time of like great suffering, you know, like at that time of the formation of the Confederacy, because the original Confederacy is five tribes, and then the sixth being the Tuscarora from Pennsylvania area, who came up after European contact. They were brought into the Confederacy. That's why it's 6 nations. But previous to that, it was the Mohawks, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Seneca. And so at that time, all of those peoples were at war with each other. You know, lots of like, I kill your cousin. And it's like when I've heard bad tellings of it, they're like, it's like Israel and Palestine. It's like, no, Israel's a southern colonial state. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing. But it's how people want you to think Israel and Palestine were, where it's like, there's not like you know what I mean? Like people, for a long time, people are like, oh yeah, it's like Hatfields and McCoys. That's what Israel and Palestine is like, right? Like, no, not at all. But it was like real bad. There was a lot of cannibalism at that time, according to the stories. And the people were unwell with heartache, you know, at losing their family members. And so at that time, the most powerful war chief was an Onondaga man named Tadadaho. And Tadadaho, they say he had snakes in his hair, and he could pull the snakes out of it, throw them at you, and kill you with it. He had like magic. He had like bad magic. There was another chief named Hiawatha, and he had 13 daughters. He had 13 daughters and a wife. And Tadaho coveted the wife and daughters of Hiawatha, and they refused him. They refused to leave Hiawatha to be with him. So he's like, traditionally toxically masculine, you know? And so what he did is he went, if I can't have them, nobody will. And he killed Hiawatha's wife and all of his daughters. He killed all of them with his medicine. And then Hiawatha was placed in a state of grief. And we'll come back to that in a moment, but that's a central part of it. Because there's three central figures really in my understanding. Well, aside from Tadarajo, but there's Hiawatha, there's Jigonzaze, and then there's the Peacemaker, the Ganawida. And those are like the three central figures. The Jigonzaze is like the mother of nations. So at that time that this was all happening, and that's just in Onondaga, but this was happening all throughout the New York and into Quebec and area, there was a young man from the Huron Nation, which is an Iroquoian people. They have the same creation story, similar language, but they were never part of the Confederacy. He came from those people. And, you get the stories of when the Peacemaker was a boy, and there was like, some say it was like there was like an immaculate conception, whether that's from European influence to the oral tradition, who knows? And then, like she tried to kill her grandson and all of these things, right? And then he kept coming back. But he comes down, some say he rode on a stone canoe, and the first people he came to were the Mohawks. The first people that he changed to his way of thinking were the Mohawks. And when he came and he brought this message from the Creator, the Mohawks were very skeptical. You get stories about Mohawks when they encounter Jesuits, and the Jesuits say, "Oh, our God is so powerful," and they go, "Okay, well, we're gonna roll this stone over top of you, and we'll see if your God saves you." You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. They dig a big hole, or they put them over the rapids. Pretty brutal people in that way. But they did that with the Peacemaker. They threw him over the rapids, like put him on a raft over the rapids, and then he came back the next day. He kept coming back, right? And so he convinced the Mohawks, and he went all throughout the Confederacy. But in his travels, Hiawatha is like deeply grieving the loss of his loved ones, and he's in the wilderness. And he's grieving, and he's at the edge of a lake. My understanding is he's at the edge of a lake, and he's pulling like reeds, and he's like, if there was someone who is suffering as I am, and they does this whole thing, and then he meets the Peacemaker there, and together they create what's called the condolence ceremony. Somebody is crying and they can't see, and then the Peacemaker said, and we would clear away, we would wipe their eyes so they can see, and we'll give them water so that they can speak, and we'll clean out their ears so that they can hear, right? And they're talking about how they would heal the trauma, heal the grieving in Hiawatha. And so there's 12 of these strings, these wampum strings. They do 3 of them that are like just kind of like whenever there's like a few condolence. But when there's a chief put up, they do, I can't remember if it's 12 or 13, but there's a bunch of these strings, and they do the whole thing for a chief. And it's really interesting because and I don't remember all of them, but I remember I was with Alun Yahes Hearn, who is a faith keeper, and he was explaining this to me. He had like a men's healing session talking about our teachings in relationship to men. And he was talking about like all of these belts, all of these wampum strings. And one of them is really interesting because for us, we are in longhouses, so everything is around the fire, right? Right? And Aguajile is family, but like Ojile is fire, right? So it's like the fire is like your family. Because when there's like grief, the strings, they talk about this spirit, and it takes a club and it scatters the logs. And so it splits the community apart and isolates us from each other. And so you got to bring those logs back together to bring the community so everyone can be healthy. You know, it's why, like, in our traditional way, you're not supposed to cremate a body, because you split that body up, the family's going to get split up, you know, and you know, people have their ways that they bury their families and all that. But in our traditional way, it's like you've got to keep the whole body together because it's like respectful, and it helps the family to heal. So there's that one, and there's this one where Alonias was like, yeah, we even had an understanding of intergenerational trauma, because there's a string that talks about the blood stains on the seat. So like when a chief dies and then the new chief is being brought up, they clean off that chair so that the animosities and the hatred and anything that previous chief had doesn't pass down to the new chief, so that he can think clearly and have a calm mind and make good decisions, right? And so they did this where for Iowanta, they cleared his, the peacemaker worked with him, and they cleared his mind, and they condoled him, and they made him well in his thoughts from his grief. And there's all other parts of the story. They go to the Oneida and the Onondaga and they go to the Oneida, the Cayuga, and the Seneca, and they gather everybody together. And Jagonsase, she's the original clan mother, she like had because at that time there was like if you eat a meal with somebody, you're a relative, you're kin, right? Your kinship. And so what she would do is she would like have warriors from different tribes or different factions, and they'd rest, and it was like a ceasefire in her longhouse. And if they ate together, they're kin. And so she was like already doing that. And so she joined with the peacemaker and with Iowanta, and they went around those four nations and got them all together before they confronted Tararajo. And so they confronted Tararajo with their combined strength, their strength and unity. And it said that they took a comb. Some say it was the peacemaker, some say it was Jagonsase, but I think it was Jagonsase. But she combed the snakes from his hair. She combed all of that bad way of thinking from his hair. And the peacemaker straightened his body and made him well so that he could have good thoughts. And so the way it ended up is that they took this person, Tararajo, who previously was like the most evil, bad guy, and they turned him into a clear thinking man. And he was the grand chief. To this day, the grand chief of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, they hold the title of Tararajo because that's who became the grand chief of the Confederacy. They didn't go and kill him and avenge the deaths of his wife and kids. They healed and brought the whole Confederacy together in kinship bonds, and they invented the clan system and the clan mothers who would nominate and raise up chiefs, right? Because when there's a chief, it's the clan mother who raises the chief, right? They select the leadership, and they can pull the horns away. So our leadership, they wear deer horns because it helps them, like symbolic of their ability to see and be alert to danger, you know? And so then you have that tree of peace, and they buried all the weapons in the tree of peace so that it's there when we need it, but we're not using it on each other, right? We're not harming each other. And so the theory of that is three fundamental teachings, right? The great law of peace, the Gayanalak Goa, is Skana, Gasastasala, and Gahningon Leo. And so Skana is peace. Like translated, it's like peace. And the way I've heard it told, it's like you're looking into a pool of water, and there's muck at the bottom of that pool. And it can make the pool, if you stir it up, it can make the pool mucky, and it's hard to see clearly. And so you want to make it as clear as you can before you make decisions. So you're not making decisions when you're angry or when you're scared or when you're aggrieved. You're making decisions from a place of clear thinking, right? So that's the first one is skana. It's peace in our minds, right? Not that like we are, it's one of those things where it's like, even when that water is clear, there's still a bit of muck at the bottom because it's impossible to like, it's like you're not emotionless. You just channeled your emotion to a state of calm, right? Of focus, right? And so it's like one of those things where like in Western culture, we're all like, oh, you got to be like hard and like emotionless robot. Facts don't care about your feelings, you know? And it's like, no, like feelings are like some of the most fundamental part of being human. And if we divorce ourselves from that, you're stunted. You're like stunted real bad, you know? And that's, again, they're talking about men. That's something that men have to deal with is stunted emotions, the stunted emotional breath. So you got to be able to be friends with your emotions and understand them so you can channel them back into a state of calm so that when you make decisions, they're the best decision you can make. Not I'm angry or I'm sad or I'm scared. It's I'm clear thinking. And to do that, you have to have a clear understanding of your emotions and your emotional state and self-awareness, right? And so the second teaching is Gasa Stasala. And Gasa Stasala, when it's translated into English, it's power. Power. But that's like, that has like a weird connotation, you know, the translation, because people think power, they think dominance and control and all of that. And the way that Alon Yahes put it to me, who's one of the faith keepers here in Akwesasne, he's a real, you know, he's a real one. He's like, you know, men should be like the sun. Men should be like the sun. We say men should be like the sun. Why should men be like the sun? And he goes through all these things and like, no, the real thing is that the sun has gravity and it pulls things to it. It pulls the family, the community, all of us together, right? So in that same way, I was talking about those logs and that fire, that bad spirit comes and scatters a log. It's power through unity, the ability to get things done, right? It's like that. It's part of why there's this myth of like individualism. It's not about individual power. You know, like individual power only goes so far. It's the ability to come together, to put our minds together as one and get things done and make things happen for the people. You know, there's no form of power that is, it's like the love leverage of power, right? Like the reason that Elon Musk is so powerful, it's not because Elon Musk himself is powerful. It's because he has all of these people that he exploits and all of these platforms that give him increased leverage that serve him and his needs and wants and his needs alone, right? He's unified all of these various elements together. And a lot of that is structural and inherited and has to do with his whiteness and his maleness and various other factors. And, you know, his dad having some kind of an emerald mine in apartheid South Africa. It's a whole history of oppression that creates that power. But we can also find power in community by coming together, right? The power through unity in kinship bonds. In I think in leftist spaces, they call it mutual aid.
No.
Right? Mutual aid. They call it in leftist spaces. But that's what it is. It's community. It's, do I know my auntie? And you get this in the indigenous community. You're going to date somebody and the mom wants to know, oh, who's your family? How are you related? What's this or that? Who do you know and that? And so, and then you have aunties and uncles who aren't maybe your blood aunties and uncles, but they're your aunties and uncles, you know? They're the people that are around you, that mentor you and help you. And so it's building that web of relationships that builds a supportive community. That's Gasa Stasala. And so the whole Haudenosaunee Confederacy is based upon clans to tribe to the whole Confederacy is one family and one longhouse, right? And families don't always get along perfectly, but they have healthy ones have ways to mediate conflict and bring us back together, right? And then the last teaching is Gahnigonlio, which in English translates to good-mindedness, right? Which is why we're called good mind grappling, Gahnigonlio. And Gahnigonlio is like the things you do, the things that you actually do in practice to achieve Kasastasala and Skana, to have those things happen. So it's like our teachings, our ceremonies, our story, the things that bring the community together, the things that help us to think clearly. In corporate talk, they'll call it self-care, right? Self-care, because it's all individual focus. Oh, you go out, you go for a walk, or you listen to music. It's like those things are good, those things are beautiful, but there's a lot of individual focus on that. It's like, okay, well, I go and I get around the kids in my job, or I get around my family, or I reconnect to people, And so those three elements form the basis for like the whole constitution of the Haudenosaunee and the procedures and the protocols and all of that. But all of that is really dry, although important. I don't actually know it super well. But those three elements are the important element is that story and that understanding of trauma, because what we experience now as Indigenous people is that we again on Turtle Island find ourselves in a time where the people are unwell and full of heartache as a result of systemic policies that have severely disrupted our communities and our community cohesion. And that's caused, addiction and diabetes and mental health struggles. And it's not just in Indigenous communities, because, we're relatively speaking, we're more recently been impacted by settler colonialism. But as you're talking about, like the Celts, you got the Irish who are still fighting settler colonialism. Even lower income, and by lower income, I mean not like wealthy white men, are also part of that. It's this cannibalistic thing where, like, first it's going to affect brown and black people. First it's going to affect queer people. It's going to impact women, but it impacts everybody. It's a death cult. It's Taradaho when he still had those snakes in his hair.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And what we get in Western culture is everybody should be Taradaho. You should be the biggest, toughest bully that there is, so nobody can mess with you.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's real damn lonely, and it's not healthy. And so that's kind of what that toxic masculinity, as I see it, is, hey, let's be Taradaho, and let's have all of these snakes in our hair and just be gross, in a way that's not facilitative of human thriving. And so, that's like the Cliff's Notes version. You can find more if you wanted to research it for yourself. But I think that's enough for now. If you have like questions, I can try to answer those. But I think that's the biggest thing, is those three teachings.
Thank you. Thank you. That story, again, like it always does, made me cry. And I'm so grateful to you for sharing. And I sent you a little package to say thank you for that story in particular and those lessons. Which, there's such power in that story of the healing and reclamation of the most harmful people in a community. And that decision by that group of people to make that man the grand chief and to say, yeah, you've caused unspeakable harm and it took a lot of work to get you here, but now you understand this, so you're going to be the one to hold it, is so antithetical to the kinds of deceit and purity culture that are so normalized in Western society, where politicians need to pretend to be perfect or we sweep their crimes under the rug in weird ways. And in leftist communities, this is also true. And it creates a culture of shame and silence and ongoing harm. Because I sometimes feel like Western culture, white culture, doesn't actually believe in healing. People want to believe in healing, but they don't really. And that story is such an example of applied community healing and setting themselves up for the win, where they didn't go straight to him first. They healed, went nation by nation, got everybody on the same page, and then went to the point that was going to be the hardest. And there's power.
Yeah, like sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, it's like I've had several talks with so there's a guy out in Los Angeles who does liberation martial arts. He's a Asian man, and he runs a Southpaw podcast. So I been on there before and talking about it's the struggles that we're in today might not be solved today. I might die before I see the actualization of my community in the way that I would like to see it.
Yeah.
I forget there was this African American man who was talking about it, and he's like, yeah, with Du Bois and others and people in that time, they didn't get to see the civil rights era, how we have it. People in that time, they were struggling for something that they didn't get to feel necessarily. That was 7 generations away.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we want to think about and this is dangerous too, because you'll get Democrats who or liberals who go well, it's not politically feasible, so we shouldn't fight for that. Yeah. But it's you gotta build power step by step, and create the situation you want and find ways to leverage things to get better and better and try to make progress. And a lot of times, especially when you're young, you want to be oh, I want things to just be this way right now. Universal healthcare tomorrow. And it's that would be beautiful. But we got to think about, how do we strategize? How do we come together as a community to make these things happen? How can we work together? How can we slowly over time build power? Because nobody goes to the White House right now and is hey, you guys are bad, just stop being bad. That's been tried. People have been trying that since 2016 to just shame Trump or the Republicans into doing the right thing. It's not real. You have to have some leverage and some power, right? And a deep relationship. So that. Sorry for cutting you off there a bit, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. I wonder, and maybe this is sort of a open question for both of us, because, both of us in a different ways have had different ideologies over the course of our lives. And I wonder now how our lives are different because our philosophies have changed. So you've shifted where you were at from 2016 to today. You say at the end of your story, you said, I don't know if I can understand these all that well. And I was like, yeah, but it comes back to the somatic piece of living it, because I see you living these things. And so maybe you don't have best words for it, but it's in your life and your body in a powerful way. And your words are stunning for it because it's embodied. But I wonder how your life feels different and how your relationship feels different with the orientation you hold today, as opposed to when you were in more red pill communities 10 years ago.
I feel like I'm more and more my authentic self. Obviously there's things to work on, but for me, When I was 14, I've had two major medical traumas in my life. When I was 14 years old, my kidney almost exploded, right? And I had like a whole bunch of stuff happen with that. And I was in the hospital for like a whole summer and had to have my kidney reconstructed. It was like a lot. But I remember thinking at that time, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor so I can help these people like they helped me, you know, in a way that makes me feel emotional still. Then I was like thinking about how I can do this, and I'm just bad at like I don't have the aptitude for like math. I wouldn't have cut it as like a doctor, you know, like a traditional medical doctor. But you know, maybe if maybe I could have, but I didn't. And so I wanted to heal and I wanted to help. And my family always had this like the thing you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get, I don't want to say get good, but you're supposed to get like, you're supposed to be as excellent as you can be so you can go back and help your people. So you can go help your people, right? You gotta help your people. Like that's what you're supposed to do. For me, that's what I've always wanted to do. Every status is how much do you help others? Okay. And then in 2013, when we came home, prior to like, because you know, like all this like conservative propaganda was still in there at that time. But like it's almost like I got sidetracked. I got sidetracked for a bit in 2016, 2017 when I fell into that depression. You know, I got sidetracked from who I'm supposed to be, who I want to be, who is actually me versus who is these other things that are in your mind that aren't actually you, they're not your heritage. You know, in fact, they're the heritage that's been harming you and others in the world. And so to me, it's always been that. And then when I got home, my first job coming home was I was a diabetes educator. I was working with elders at the Let's Get Healthy program. And I felt like, man, like it's real hard working with elders are set in their ways. You know, it's hard to like move them, you know? So I like started working with kids. I was a diabetes educator at the Boys and Girls Club. And then I was that until 2018 to 2019. And then I was the branch manager for 3 of our clubhouses, like about 120 kids, and then the staff that do those 3 programs. So I was like already doing this stuff and just trying to figure out like, how do I be better? How do I do things better for the people? And also selfishly for myself, you know, like you got to take care of yourself. That's kind of what's changed for me is more clarity of like, this is who I am. This is what I want to be. This is what I'm actually about. And these are things that I'm choosing for myself, right? These are things that I'm choosing for myself and that are actually in line with like who I am. I'm not just angry at some amorphous group of people for no reason, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Because that's kind of what I see a lot is like in conservative spaces, in red pill spaces, it's like we're angry at women or we're angry at trans people or we're angry at ex-foreigner. A lot of trauma that's been diverted into cult-like behavior. And so how that's helped me be better is I feel more healthy that way. I'm able to hold down a stable relationship with a woman and my children, you know? Like I was real scared. I was real scared about how my anger was going to like express itself around my children, you know? And I'm fortunate enough to say that I've been able to handle that and manage that, and I'm not harming them, you know? I'm not harming them. Obviously, like there's times where you're with a kid and like, it's rough. It's hard to keep your emotional stability sometimes, but I'm able to do that better and better. And I think that that's important. I think it's important that people take the time and self-awareness to figure out what they want and what situation they want in their lives for real, and to actually understand what do I actually need. As an example, and this is a kind of like a side example, I have a former college roommate named David Terrell, and he's like the single most skilled grappler I've ever met in my life. He's a NCAA Division I All-American in folk style wrestling. He's a jiu-jitsu brown belt world champion, and he's a judo U.S. national team member. He represented in 2025. He represented the U.S. at judo, and he wants to be an Olympian. In 2024, he was like 5 spots away from qualifying for the Olympics in their like point scoring ladder. And so he's trying to train for 28. But anybody who knows, judo in the U.S. is like real bad. Like there's like not a lot of support for it. USA judo is kind of corrupt and they don't really support their athletes. And so he is in an environment or finds himself in an environment with like limited training partners, limited resources. And so we go down to Virginia to talk to his boss, Ryan Hall, who's like, hey, how do we all, you, Thomas, me, his brother, Josh, Phil, how do we like the people who care about him and who want him to achieve this thing of being an Olympian in 28, going to LA. How do we make that happen for him? I go, oh, well, I know Nick Triton. He's a couple-time Olympian in judo. He trains in Montreal. We'll bring him to Montreal and we'll figure this out that way. We'll like all work together. And so it takes a community of people working together to have good outcomes, to have like powerful outcomes, right? You can do things on your own, but even when you do things on your own, it's like, no, you had help. You had help. You had systemic help. You had family help. You had, like maybe you were fortunate enough to be born in the United States instead of like freaking the Congo, You're born in the Congo. It's like real, other places, like we're in the imperial core. We are in the imperial core. So like just being born here, even being brown, even being indigenous, I have so much privilege over people from Cuba, because they don't have the resources or the support they need because of imperialism. So it's a lot of like, how do we work together and what support can I get to be able to reach out for help? Who can I have to help me? How can I build relationships and they're in a reciprocal way? Not just like taking advantage of people, but it's a lot of understanding the environment you're in and thinking about how I can navigate it so that I can create the outcomes I want, and the outcomes that are good for me and the outcomes that are good for others, and to hold on to my personal morality in that, like not being a complete grifter, like you get these like Jordan Peterson types, these Andrew Tate types, don't care about the people that they're helping, quote unquote helping. They care about their own personal power. They care about their own personal influence and their own money. And it's like, yeah, like people got to eat too, people who run nonprofits, they got to eat too. But it's about what is that relationship with your fan base, with your community? Who is your community? Understanding that. And so I just feel more aligned. I feel more aligned and more embodied in the things I do. And I've never when I was wrestling in 2016, 2017 through 2019, I just thought you got to work harder. You got to train more. You got to do better. As my thoughts have shifted, I understand better. I was talking to you earlier about Iowa and Iowa style, and Iowa's fallen off like super hard. They're still like number 4 in the country, but like they're not what they used to be. But now there's like this whole Cale, I don't know if you know Cale Sanderson, but Cale Sanderson is like a 4-time undefeated NCAA champion, Olympic champion. He's like one of the best to ever do it from the early 2000s. He is the single winningest coach in NCAA history for since like 2013. Penn State, well, he was at Iowa State first, but then Penn State is just dominating wrestling, dominating wrestling. And they're like, well, what do you do? What's important? He's like, wrestling, it's just a game. It's just a game. It might be my favorite game, and I take it seriously. It's my favorite game, but it's just a game at the end of the day. And it's like, wow, that's like a way big difference between you have the Iowa style where they take it seriously, but then if you lose, it's like a death sentence and you become depressed. Like you look at some of the Iowa champions who they failed to make the finals of the NCAA or whatever, and it's like there was a death in the family. You know, you lose a wrestling match, it's like there's a death in the family. And that's what happened to me in 2015, 2016. I lost that match, and it was like, it was that deep grief, you know? The difference of motivation, where are you motivated by pleasure or by pain? Right? And it's like, I'm motivated right now. I'm motivated by pleasure because these are the things that make me happy,
Yeah.
right? These are the things that make me happy.
Yeah.
And you get freaking Jordan Peterson, and they're like, oh, hedonism is evil and you shouldn't be happy. It should be like you're just disciplined and white knuckling all the time. And it's like, yeah, that's a good way to just have lots and lots of stress in your life. You know,
Yeah.
not everything super duper serious. And since my mind has shifted that way, I feel like I understand the sport better. I'm more technically sound. I'm able to understand different grappling arts very quickly because they have different context to them. And so there's like a lot of different things in my life that have like shifted me away from those kinds of things. Where it's like, yeah, there's still a certain hardness you have to you, but you better have some softness too. Because you can't be hard all the time. It's like you can't white knuckle it all the time. It's too much. You know, like there's this guy, Tom Longboat, who was a distance runner, a marathon runner from Six Nations. They have like the Tom Longboat Award for the best Canadian Indigenous athlete every year or whatever. He was like a ridiculously good long distance runner. And at the time, his secret was he would train really hard and then he would train light. And then he would train really hard and then he would go light and he would rest. And then everyone else around him, oh, he's lazy. He doesn't train hard every day. He's lazy. It's like, no, he's recovering. He's recovering so he can train hard again or work hard again later. Right? Because if you just train hard all the time, or you just work hard all the time, or you just white knuckle it all the time, you actually get less done. You get less done. And so again, there's this ethos that's very aligned with like the pull them up by your bootstraps, that is like this Dan Gable thing that's based in trauma. It's based in trauma. It's based in the death of his older sister.
Yeah.
That's where it's like his oldest trauma response. And then you have this other one that's like, and that was successful in its time. And now you have this like way more successful, and they're focused on gratitude and on having fun and playfulness and deeply understanding the thing, not just on who has the best cardio, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, well, who would have thought that was like better? You know, who would have thought that was better? And not that you can't have some choice come out of that program, but you know, just like that.
It's such a fascinating scaled representation of how we develop trauma responses to cope with whatever we experience in our youth. And then we either cling to those and let them define our lives into crippling failure, depression, whatever those things lead to when we mature beyond them, or we heal them and outgrow them. And it's fascinating to see that at the scale of a sport, where this trauma response defined success for a minute. It worked, and now it doesn't work anymore. And the sport is changing beyond that. And it's funny, I know virtually nothing about the world of athletics that you live in, but I did follow the woman who was a figure skater who took a gold at the last Olympics.
Oh, yeah, her.
Refused all of the eating protocols, refused all of the like standard wisdom of the sport. And she was like, I'm gonna live my life and eat whatever I want and be happy eating whatever I want. And then she won a gold. And everyone was like, oh, wow, it's incredible she could do that while she actually ate food she enjoyed. And it just feels like there is something of a shift happening, perhaps.
Oh, dude, it's insane. So like, I don't know if you know Ben Askren is. So Ben Askren is a Bellator MMA champion, and then he went in the UFC past his prime, and he was like one of the best MMA fighters. He was insane. And then but before that, he was a U.S. Olympian and an NCAA champion. But he currently runs Askren Wrestling Academy in Wisconsin, which is the single most successful youth wrestling program in the country. In the 2024 Olympic cycle, they had like 3 high schoolers in the Olympic trials on the U.S., right? And they're like, so they're just like insane. Like they have like 3 high schoolers in the Olympic trials. And so I'm like, okay, I want to understand what this guy's doing. And he's like, okay, so what we do is they come in at 5 years old and we just make sure they have a lot of fun. And before they turn 13, I don't want them to compete. What I want them to do is to fall in love with the sport and think the sport is like super duper duper fun, so that when they hit puberty, they hit the change, they can decide how serious they want to be about it, and they can have fun, and then they have intrinsic motivation to train hard.
Yeah.
Right? Like my brother Philip, he was a NCAA Division I assistant coach at Binghamton University in 2023. He had a heavyweight on his team who from the time he was 7 to 12 was like the number 1 ranked kid in the country. And then at 12 years old, he quit wrestling, came back when he was 16 and won like a couple of state championships, went D1. But Phil noted that because his dad was like insane and like not good for him, like just like incredibly abusive man, to the point where the kid doesn't believe in it. Like the kid's like, I don't eat vegetables. And he's like, what about beans? Like beans are sneaky vegetables. It's like, okay. So he's got like some like bad ideas about like what's good for him health-wise. Yeah. But Phil would notice like, the kid's very skilled, hyper athletic, but because of what happened to him, he's not as mentally tough.
Yeah.
Because mental toughness isn't about like just being tough and hard. It's about being able to come back to that skana, to that calm focus in the eye of the storm, being able to be calm. You know, that's something that my wife does super well. Whenever there's like an emergency or a high stress situation, she's so just focused, you know? So it's like that, you know, like even though he's like, I'm like super duper, like he's not like super duper conservative, but he's conservative, right? He's like a Republican. He's like nominally a Republican, but like really it's like in your embodiment, when you're working with these kids, you're not acting like it.
Yeah.
You know, you just have this thought because you came up in the early 90s and 2000s.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like, then you see that. And then I there's this guy, Valentin Kalika, who was the coach for the first women's Olympic champion, Helen Maroulis, and Amit Alor, who was Olympic champion in the past cycle. And then Aaron Pico, who was like very, very, very good. He's a former USSR guy who is now in the US and teaches wrestling. And he's like produced some of the best athletes in the world. And he's like, yeah, I'm like listening to him talk in his interviews. And he's like, yeah, well, before the age of 12, we just have them do gymnastics and they learn how to use their body. And then when they hit 13, it's like, okay, look, this is proven, because back in the day, it was like the US was like technically like skills wise, not as good as the rest of the world, but like on a physicality level, like we're super duper tough and they just like out cardio people, right? Like that Gable stuff. And then now that people are trying to be more playful in their training and like understand the technique, and there's a lot of conceptual understanding, now the US is like insane, like really, really good at wrestling. You see this pattern happen over and over again. And you got to think, well, okay, there's something to that.
Yeah.
And it's important that we acknowledge that, and that we try to see things for what they are. Because again, it's like there's half truths, or like hard work is real. You have to put effort in. Generally, people don't want to be lazy. People don't feel good when they're feeling lazy. They feel good when they're engaged in being present and doing something productive, right?
Yeah.
So that's like people don't want to be like conservatives. Always like, oh, who's a leech and who's not a leech and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't know. The biggest leeches are the guys at the top. So anyway, that's just my whole Soapbox. That's my soapbox.
Yeah, I remember when I was wearing dog tags all the time and trying to impress recruiters and reading Marcus Aurelius, and just how what I felt like at that point in time in my life was impotent. I didn't feel like I had any power, insecure. I was terrified of failing in some way. And I mean, honestly, suicidally depressed. And I was trying to find a way out of that suicidal depression. And it felt to me like that militaristic right-wing framework was the pathway to a successful life for me, and the only pathway, because I felt like anything else, I was just going to fail. And it's funny looking back on that time and realizing that that is what failure looked like. That is what did you call it earlier? A mode of being failure.
Yeah,
My
that's how
mode
your
of
body.
being, yeah, it was a philosophy of self-hatred that was self-perpetuating, and there was never going to be a pathway out of it. If I had stuck on that path, I would just have continued to be self-hating and and unhappy the rest of my life. And you were talking about how one of the differences you feel between your philosophical shift between Red Pill and now is about happiness. And I agree. I feel a level of calm and happiness now that I simply never experienced when I was a young man, convinced that I was failing and depressed and at risk and trying to fill those gaps with some kind of ideology or physical power. Perhaps similar to you, the reason that I didn't join the Marine Corps was because of my martial arts instructor, who was a wonderful man named Senor Garcia. Yeah. And he taught us in that dojo that we are always responsible for our bodies as weapons, that nothing else changes that. No matter what, we are always responsible for any harm that our body causes. And when I thought about that, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That made sense to me when I first heard it at 13, 14, and through my teenage years. And when I looked at joining the military, I was like, oh, I don't trust George Bush to use my body as a weapon in Iraq, so I'm not going to go over there because of this philosophy from martial arts. I was just lucky to find my way into a healthy dojo. And I see that now in the Red Pill community as these young men are conscripted into types of violence, where in this movie I was mentioning, The Manosphere, that just came out, one of the things that they do is try and trick people who they think might be predators of some kind into public spaces and then just physically assault them in brutal ways. And there's no vetting, there's no confirmation. They're just like, that guy there, get him. And then a whole gang of young men rushes up and physically assaults someone and then runs away. And that is a kind of outsourcing of the responsibility of our bodies as weapons to a third-party ideology that is not one that I think we necessarily agree with. And you can see how it doesn't contribute to happiness. There's a fear in it. There's a fear in all of those influencers and those young men's eyes that feels related to this, where they're terrified of being a victim of that kind of violence or have been a victim of that kind of violence. And I guess what I'm working my way around to here is that it feels like some of what this ideological shift is learning how to lose. And it's something that my experience with combat arts is far less than yours by orders of magnitude. And so I know that you've probably lost more fights than I've ever been in, or sparring matches. And that ability to lose with grace and have that become part of your own learning as opposed to a failure. And I wonder if that's something you could speak to at all.
Oh man, this is this is a super common thing that comes up in combat sports, right? And it's prescient because I just spent last week. We were supposed to have this last Friday, but I went down to Virginia to visit my friend David, who I was speaking about previously, as well as Ryan Hall at 50-50 Jiu-Jitsu. For those who don't know, Ryan Hall is he's 12-1 in the UFC. He's really, really good at Jiu-Jitsu. So we went down there, and the thing that you encounter, and we encounter it here as well as there, is like people in general as a beginner are super insecure, and they are really, really afraid to fail. And so they're afraid to try, and they want to protect their ego a lot. Right. And so it's like, if you want to beat somebody, especially at grappling, you've got to get close to them. You've got to like physically get close. And so beginners will like do this and like be like, oh, I won. He didn't do anything to me. And it's like, but you didn't do anything either. You have to do the things that you're bad at. You have to do the things that you're bad at. You know, you have to like, okay, I'm not good at leg locks because I'm a wrestler. I don't do leg locks. So I'm going to engage in this leg lock situation, understanding that if I do this wrong and I don't admit defeat, he can pop my ACL. But like, I'm going to engage in that because I have to learn it. I have to understand it, right? I got to learn how to throw. So like, I got to learn how this 2-on-1 works. So I got to like engage there. And then reflecting on why you lost and then what happened and what changed. And so something that was interesting, and we're talking about situations and controlling your situations, is we're like, Ryan's teaching the advanced class, right? For like all of his advanced students, which just means purple belt and up. He's talking about creating that situation and making sure you have a game, like something that you are good at and you do, that you can repeat over and over and over, and then you funnel it there. And we brought up Ben Askren, right? Because Ben Askren is like super unathletic. He's like very, very, very unathletic. He has a lot of like isometric strength. He's very mobile. And so what he had to do is understand his body and develop a strategy that suited his body. So if you had somebody who's like very explosive and athletic, they're going to like tackle you from outside. They're going to like create distance and tackle you. Somebody like Jordan Burroughs, or, you know, like somebody whose physical attributes suits that skill set. And he's like, oh yeah, like Ben Askren, he learned how to scramble. He learned how to use his mobility, and he created a game plan around the things that he's good at, strengths first, right? Around his strengths. And then he's like a 2-time NCAA champion. He's a Hodge Trophy winner. It's like, but if Ben Askren had gone into those matches and his game plan was, I'm going to blast W, he probably would have lost to that same opponent, different game plan, different outcome. Right? And so it's like, when you enter into a relationship, right? So like your relationship with the sport of wrestling or the sport of jiu-jitsu or whatever relationship you're describing, you don't actually know a lot about it yet. You don't know a lot about it. So you have to try things. You have to be not foolhardy, but like you have to be brave enough. What happens if I do this? What happens if I put my hand here? What happens if I put my hand there? Getting over that fear of failure is the first step to becoming a competent martial artist. That's the first step. And that's really, really hard to get over, because a lot of people, and again, this is part of like the Iowa versus Penn State thing, is a lot of people ascribe their identity to whether or not they're winning matches.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you lose, if every time I lose, I have a 6-month depression, how often am I going to go compete? Right? How often am I going to go compete? Versus, oh, I lose, whatever. I go home, my wife and kids are still there. They still love me, you know? Or I go home and like nobody, like I'm a 6-time national champion. Nobody in my community cares. You know what I mean? Like nobody actually cares. You know, how many people in your community know who Mihain Lopez is? Do you know who Mihain Lopez is? No, you don't. Because even though he's a 5-time Olympic champion, even though he's the greatest wrestler to ever live, nobody knows who he is. Who cares? Why does it matter? It doesn't matter, right? But to him, he went through that journey. That journey was what's important for him, right?
Yeah.
That's
Man,
what matters.
I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, I just can't help it here. I feel like this is the exact philosophy that got you to be able to hear your wife, because some part of you was able to recognize that the philosophy you were holding wasn't working. And from this framework of combat sports, you were able to be like, oh, yeah, I'm losing right there. So what is this winning thing over here, and how do I lead into that? Like, it feels like the same philosophy.
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, it's very similar. Like, like I hate to quote Musashi Miyamoto, but like those guys, they know what they're talking about. You know, he's like, when you see the way in one thing, you see the way in all things, right? And that doesn't mean like, oh, you're good at wrestling, so you're good at chemistry, or you should talk about vaccines, and you know what I mean? It doesn't mean that you should, but when you are able to have a deep relationship with one thing, you can transfer those lessons into your relationships with other things, right? There's a transfer of learning that occurs, and there's near transfer and far transfer, and some things don't transfer one to one, but a lot of the concepts around it do transfer, you know, like in wrestling, a lot of it is about base and balance and keeping ourselves like centered so that we can draw strength from the ground and transmit it through our body into our opponent so we can do powerful things, right? So a lot of it is, how do I keep my base? How do I keep my balance physically and disrupt theirs? But then there's also the emotional game. How do I keep my emotional balance and disrupt theirs? At the same time, these two things happen, right? And so it's like there's always, or at least very, very, very often, some transfer there. Almost nobody marries because in order to do that, you're just learning about yourself. You're learning about yourself. You're learning about your wants, your needs. You're learning about what it means to be in a relationship. And when you do that, you're very, very likely to fail. And so you need to like have experience what it means to be in a relationship. How do I show up for this person? How do they show up for me? Are we just like incompatible? Okay, then like maybe like we are physically attracted to each other, but we're incompatible in all these other ways, so we shouldn't be together. Those kinds of things that are like, it's like, hey, I really, really, really like blast double legs, but I'm also not explosive. So maybe I shouldn't like focus entirely on blast double legs, right? And I should focus on something else, you know? So for me, I'm like, for my weight class, I'm very, very short. I'm 5'6". I fight guys who are like 6'3".
Yeah.
So I'm not going to play games from far away. I'm not going to like, it's like being a boxer and I'm shorter. I'm going to jab people. That's a bad plan. It's a bad plan. Get in close. Right. So it's that, I think it's that really is like being able to properly assess yourself, assess your surroundings, and being honest about it. And then being okay with it in terms of like that it's not permanent.
Yeah. That ability to change. Something stood out to me that you said earlier, and I just wanted to both celebrate it and ask a dumb question. The celebration, it's so beautiful to hear you talk about traveling to, I think it was Virginia, to support your friend who does jujitsu. And the whole community of, sounds like mostly men around him, showing up without being asked even really, just self-organizing to support this man in his learning and journey and goals. And that's just something that I think is exceptionally rare today. I am struggling to think of another example of a group of adult men organizing, self-organizing, just to support another adult man in his goals and like figuring out solutions to those problems. So there's a power and a beauty in that. And here's my dumb question. Why did you all do that?
Because we have a deep relationship and care about each other. Right? Like I've known David since 2011. I've known David since 2011. He was my roommate in college, you know, and there's part of it where it's like some people are really prone to giving, right? And caring about others. And you know, Ryan Hall is like he's a white guy, right? But there's a part of him that's like really indigenous in that he cares about the people around him and wants them to succeed and is willing to set them up to succeed, right? And sometimes that gets taken advantage of, where he'll take somebody at their word, that because like he'll help you, right? Like anybody can be a world champion if you hold their hand and do everything for them, right? Anybody can. If you do that, anybody can be a world champion. That's Elon Musk. He's got things done for him. You know what I mean? That's those people, and they don't acknowledge that people did things for them.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like, I'll help you, but you've also got to be helping yourself. Right. You've also got to be helping yourself. You've got to also be committed, because I can't do it for you.
No.
Right. So in that case, why that happened is just like, we just want to see him succeed. For me, there's, it's like, there's some selfishness to it too. Cause I'm like, I run a youth program and I want to be able to bring David in and say, this is an Olympian. Here we go. This guy, he's an Olympian. Learn from him.
Yeah.
Right? There's part of it that's that, but like part of it is Philip and I, like, and granted, David's like probably the single greatest overall grappler I've ever met in my entire life.
Yeah.
Okay. He's like top 5 in the world at 4 different grappling disciplines. He's like Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. Right. And so like nobody ever teach him how to throw a punch, because then we're all doomed. Right. But Philip and I have had him up to do seminars and paid him to do seminars for our kids like 3 or 4 times in the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we get him how without burning ourselves? Like, I'm not just throwing money at David, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going, you come up, you do a seminar for the kids, we'll pay you, and then you can use that money to help you go to these tournaments and training camps. And you come up, and Philip will drive you to Tritons, and we'll take you to Tritons, and we'll help you learn. We'll help you, introduce you to this person, and we're going to help you. We're going to make this happen. And a lot of this has to do with my work and my understanding in Greco-Roman wrestling. Because like when I got home in 2013, I was going to be done with wrestling. I was just going to be done. You know what I mean? Like, I wanted to quit. So like we can get into that too, but it's like after 2013, when I got home, and I did have that like little side, like my experience with like Red Pill and Manosphere and all that, it's like this, it's like I'm on this path, and then I get depressed and I go here, and I had to come back to it. Right. And that's what I see happening is people on their path, and then they get depressed. Maybe they break up with a girlfriend or a partner otherwise. And then boom, they're like, oh, well, this must be the answer. But for me, it was like, I came home, my brother and I came home from university. I'm sorry, I'm kind of like meandering past your question at this point, because you're talking about why did we decide to help David? And so when Philip and I got home, the first thing is my brother Jalissa was like, hey, there's this young man in the community. He's 15. He just started wrestling last year. You guys are really, really good. You should help him. You should help him wrestle. You should help him learn how to wrestle. And so we're like, all right, let's do that. So we set up on the Sunday. We're going to show up at 8 a.m. and we're going to show up at your dad's house. And so we show up. There's this long driveway with a yard, and it's 8 a.m. on the Sunday. And this 15-year-old boy, he's about 300 pounds. He's like full 300 pounds, like he's a football player. Yeah. But he's out there like running wind sprints. And we're like, wow, this kid, he's going to be insane. He's going to be really, really good. Like, it's going to be a pleasure to work with him. He's just hard worker. Good. So we go in there, my brother and I, and we're like so excited to start working with this kid. And the first thing he says to us, the very first thing he said to us that wasn't on the phone, that wasn't via Facebook Messenger, was, I'm sorry, guys. I've been up since 10 p.m. yesterday drinking alcohol. Well, he said drinking beers. I've been having beers since 10 p.m. yesterday. I'm doing wind sprints out here so I can stay awake. And I'm like, this kid is a functional alcoholic at age 15. And most kids in that situation would just kind of ghost you. They wouldn't respond, or they like cancel on you. But I'm like, okay, like you had enough like respect and awareness to like not cancel because you do want to do this. It's just that your addiction is in the way.
Yeah.
So at the time, I didn't have like the understanding of like trauma and stuff that I have. I was still like, so my brother and I were like, look, you're not going to learn. You're not in a mental state where you can learn. So we're just going to beat you up for like an hour and don't do this again. And so we did. We beat him up for like an hour, like wrestling, like not like punching and kicking, but just like making his life miserable in wrestling. And so from that time forward, we took him under our wing, my brother and I.
Yeah.
We got a mat. We got a 30 by 32 mat and put it at the Boys and Girls Club. And after work, we would train him on that mat. And then we realized, okay, Philip and I are like pretty good, but like I'm not that good. I should take him to Montreal where they have like actually good coaches. So we took him to meet this guy named Doug Yates, who's a 5-time Olympian. He's a Canadian Hall of Famer, right? He's like the best guy in Canada to ever do it. We started taking him to Doug, and we would train there too. And Doug, he's like one of the most indigenous men I know. He'd take his shirt off of your back and give it to you. You know what I mean? Like we had a teammate who he owed like $3,000 to Wrestling Canada, so he couldn't compete at the national tournament until he paid it. And Doug was like, I'm just going to pay that. I'm just going to pay it and you go. And then my understanding is he never got paid back. You know what I mean? Yeah. Doug trained me and Phil for like almost 10 years and we never paid him a cent. He just loves the sport. He's got his own piano business or whatever. And we were training with his son. So we were training partners with his son. So there was a reciprocal relationship that way. Right?
Yeah.
But it was like at the same time that he was training us, we were training this young boy. And so this young boy between 2013 and 2015, he was in 2015, New York State champion, Canadian national champion, Pan American champion. He wrestled Division I at SUNY Buffalo. And so he got real good. But more importantly, he was the first person in his family to go to university and graduate. He's the first person in his family to do that. He's got a wife, he's got kids, he's got a stable job. He's out in California working electric, but he's like, he's holding a family together. Yeah. And then his mom was inspired and she went back to school and now she has her master's degree. And so what we saw, my brother and I, was the way that mentorship and sport and these things, they can heal a person, but also the family around them, right? There's a healing that occurs there because he was a child of divorce. His dad and mom were separated, and his dad was like a drug dealer or whatever. But there was like a healing that occurred there. That wasn't intentional. We didn't like, we're going to save this kid's life, or I wouldn't even say we saved this kid's life. It's just we put him on a good path. You know what I mean? And it was us and his mom, and then the coaches at his local high school who were like willing to be humble enough to be like, instead of going to his high school practice on this Wednesday, he's going to go with you guys up to Montreal and he's going to train with you guys. And you know what I mean? Yeah. So we experienced that. And so I guess just as an ethos, it's about like, okay, this is an individual sport, but we're all trying to make sure that we can achieve what we want to achieve. If David goes and he wins the Olympics, or he even makes it to the Olympics, I will know that, yeah, that's his accomplishment. That's his accomplishment. 100%. That's David's accomplishment. But I was part of that. I helped make that happen. If that happens, I will have helped make that happen. Right? So yeah. It's like that, really, I want to see you do well. I want to see my wife do well. I want to see my nephews and nieces. I want to see the kids in our communities do well and be successful and experience setbacks, but then come back from them. And so that's kind of what got me into the work that I'm doing now. And it's weird because that's all happening. All of that stuff with that young boy I'm doing all of that. And then 2015, he wins the New York States. And then 6 months later, we lose at the Olympic trials. And then he goes off to university. So I lost part of my community. This young boy who ended up being a good friend of mine, I lost him to university, which is good for him. You know, you got to let him move on with his life, you know. And then I lost, and then I became massively depressed. And I had this whole digression from this path that I was on.
Yeah.
That if I wasn't careful, could have captured me completely, you know? So that's what happened. And that ethos is that's why we help, is because of that ethos. I know that if David needed if I needed David's help, he'd come and help. You know, we've got from that gym, there's this guy, Josh Peacock. He's like a strength and conditioning specialist. And he's like, it's weird because he's understands physical therapy, but at the same time, he was a strength and conditioning coach for the Miami Dolphins. Right. So he's like this, like almost 260 pounds, like just jacked dude, but he's just a great guy, you know? And he's going to come up and do a seminar for our kids about like our teenagers about like how body mechanics work and how to have good form, you know, and he's going to do that. We're going to pay his plane ticket. He's going to come up and then we're going to teach him some wrestling. And as a kind of a barter trade, he's going to do that seminar, you know? Yeah. And that's just like deepening relationships. And so a lot of relationships is how can I help you and how can you help me? And we can leverage each other so that we can achieve things that we couldn't otherwise achieve. Right?
Yeah.
How do we support each other in that manner? That's kind of like, I guess that's the crux of it.
I'm hearing reflections of, forgive my pronunciation, Gusastasala?
Gusastasala. Gusastasala. It's power through unity. Right. That's power through unity. That's kinship bonds as they mutual aid.
Yeah.
Mutual aid.
Before we get into concluding thoughts, I would be remiss. You are the single most athletic person that I interact with on a regular basis. Your fitness and the way that you work and treat your body is just an absolute inspiration. And I wonder, as you've been sharing these pieces about mindset, I had the privilege of having traditional Grand Chief of Wustolok, Ron Tremblay, on here not too long ago. And when I asked him what his advice was for young men in the world today, the first thing he said was take care of your bodies. Your bodies are where it starts from, and that's where you work from. And so take care of them. And as someone who clearly has an incredible level of care for your body, I wonder if you have any advice or words for people, especially men, maybe especially young men, about how to think about and tend body today.
Yeah, that's a real deep one. But I'm going to start with a story that happened last year. It has to do with some of the work we do, because this is an important question in the work that I'm doing now via Good Mind Grappling. And it's exactly that. How do young people, girls and boys, build a healthy relationship to their body? So last March, we had a young boy come into our gym, and he's like 300 pounds, about 5'5". He's like 14 years old. And his mom was like, yeah, he like kind of just wants to sit and play video games all day. And we tried to take him to lacrosse, but the lacrosse coach said he was too fat to play lacrosse, right? He said he was too fat to play lacrosse. And so, like, what we did is we went, okay, he's big, so we're going to make sure that, like, he's not doing things standing with, like, agility, because, you know, you got a lot of weight to move around. So we had him wrestle from his knees and go with somewhat lighter people so he would have earlier success, right? Like, not in a fake way, but like he had some earlier success where he wasn't just completely like one of the games we play is like knee tag, where like it's a lot of lateral motion and like a lot of like moving in and out. And that kind of a game wouldn't have suited him right away because he would have lost right away and then like reinforced the things that he thought about his body previously, right? And so he'd give up. I don't want, like, maybe he wouldn't have given up. I wouldn't know, like, maybe he wouldn't have, but there was a higher chance that he would have. So we did that with him. And then, like, we do that, and he gets a little early success. And then it was like he wanted to be at our gym 3 hours a day, 3 days a week doing wrestling. And we're like, you got to slow down. You're going to hurt yourself. But he liked it that much. And then we were playing knee tag. He's like winning with kids who were like faster than him. Right. And then we had one day where he was coming for the tween class, like the 10 to 13, and staying for the adult class 13 and up. And we had one day where it wasn't his mom who brought him. It was his grandfather who brought him. And it was like his whole performance changed because the grandfather's over there like saying like just these nasty self-talk, like just this nasty stuff to him, like under his breath. And you can tell that his grandfather is like just not healthy for him. Like he was able to do shoulder rolls. Like I was teaching him to do shoulder rolls and all that. And then his grandfather's watching, and it's like a completely different kid. He lost all of his skill. Huh. So I had to like bring him in and be like, look, bud, like I know that you've got people here and all that, but I want you to be like just here with just me. You're only going to listen to the things that I'm saying, and everything else you can forget about. And then he started so I centered him around focusing and being with me, right? Because I saw what was happening. I didn't have the availability to like stop the whole class and then chastise this old man in front of the whole class.
Yeah.
Right. So I made sure to because that would have like ruined everyone else's experience as well. It's kind of hard to navigate those situations when you're in them. And if it was a situation where like the grandpa was like going to bring him more often, we never saw that grandpa again, but I would have had to have had a serious discussion with that grandpa and been like, hey, like this is a lot of the problem with youth sports is parents and caregivers getting toxic in this way. And so we got through that, and this boy's been wrestling, and now he's doing track and field, doing shot put. You know what I mean? So it's like before, he's this kid, he's stuck on his couch playing video games. He's been told, you're not athletic. You can't do this. You're too fat. And then you give him some appreciation for his body. And look, he's seeking these things out on his own.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, you have to appreciate your body. Because we can come at it from the concept of like, I hate it. I'm going to beat my body into submission, and I'm going to but you inhabit your body. So you need to understand it. You need to understand it, right? You need to understand its strengths, its weaknesses, its limitations, what can change, what can't change. Like, that's why I love wrestling so much. It's a super inclusive sport. I don't know if you know who Anthony Robles is. But Anthony Robles is a wrestler from Arizona State University. He was NCAA Division I champion at 125 pounds. Anthony Robles was born with one leg. So the sport of wrestling and combat sports in general, but mostly grappling, just because I don't have a lot of experience with striking personally, it's about understanding your body and then how to use your body strategically. Right? That's what martial arts is. It's about understanding your body. So you have to understand your body, your relationship to your body, your relationship to your emotions, your relationship to the ground, and then your relationship to your opponent or partner. So it's really, all of these things are very similar. You get young men, they just don't know how to be in a relationship with things. They don't know how to be in a relationship with things. They don't know how to be in a relationship with their own body, with the food that they eat, how to be present with it. So it's not like you got to eat hard-boiled eggs and broccoli, like maybe if that works for you, you got to be able to be present and be in relationship with your body, right?
Yeah.
The best physical regimen is the one that you can maintain.
Yeah.
Find something that you enjoy doing and do that. For me, I hate cardio. Like if you're training for a competition, like you've got to do it, you'll eat it. Like you'll eat that. But if cardio, like jogging or whatever, was what I had to do every day, I wouldn't train ever. But for me, I can go 6 hours. I'll roll on the mats.
Yeah.
Even if I'm losing, I'll roll on. It's fun. Like I love that. So for me, that's what I do. And for others, it might be something different. But you find the thing that you enjoy. Because again, if you're motivated by pain, it's a weaker motivator than pleasure. Find pleasure.
Yeah.
Right? Find something that makes you feel good, right? That makes you enjoy it, that stimulates you mentally, like that. So I think that's the thing that I would suggest for young men is, and girls too, and women. But since we're on the topic of men and masculinity, that's what I would say is like, is you got to find something that you enjoy and that you're willing to put up with a little bit of pain for because it's worth it. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's any relationship. I love my wife. Sometimes it's painful being in love with my wife. Sometimes it's not perfect. Sometimes I got to be up at 2 a.m. with a crying toddler, but
Yeah.
I love my daughter. So it's worth it. I chose that. It didn't just happen to me. I chose it. Right? So, and sometimes things happen to you that you don't choose.
No.
But as much as you can, you want to choose those things. You want to have that freedom to choose. So, yeah, like that.
Oh, I love that advice. That acceptance and love of body as a gateway to your body becoming whatever it's meant to be for your work. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. That's all of wrestling. That's all of combat sports is understanding.
As we're watching, I don't want to pretend that this episode of this podcast exists outside of the socio-political context of our times, which is an escalating level of fascism in the world today and a type of violent colonialism that is spreading. What we're seeing in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Iran are all iterations of empire and colonial settler whiteness. And I just wanted to, I feel like I'd again be remiss if, as I'm having this wonderful conversation with an Indigenous man, if I didn't give you the space to speak to any of those pieces that you wanted to, as they relate to any of this work, any intersections that you see, any words you have for us settler colonial people who are trying to do better, anything you wanted to speak to around any of those pieces that are happening today.
Well, there's a whole lot to unpack there. There's like a boomerang effect, right? Anything that happens abroad is going to come home.
Yeah.
And part of it is that for people of color and for marginalized communities throughout the US, like it's getting worse. Like it's getting worse than it has been in the past. But none of this is new. It's weird because it's like fascism is the term for when colonial structures impact white people. You know what I mean? It's like canary in the coal mine kind of thing. Not that I'm not sympathetic to it, not that it's not primarily of impacting brown people via ICE and all that. Like these things matter and they're like dangerous, right? But we have to understand that none of this is actually new. It's just changed form and it's just happening in a different way, right? And so it becomes incumbent upon us to strategize what can we do, what can we do in our communities? And if you look at Minneapolis and what happened there, I'm not like perfectly up to date with it. There's so much happening that it's hard to keep track of everything because it's insane. Like the amount of stuff happening, it's literally their strategy to flood the zone and make sure that like you can't address all of it at once. But my understanding is that when in the height of the stuff happening in Minnesota, Alex Preddy died, Renee Good, and all that. There was like a signal chats, and the community was coming together to keep everybody informed about what was happening. Right? Here's where ICE is. They're on this street, and they're doing X, Y, and Z. Right? And so the thing is more than ever, it's important for us to build community locally, especially like it's hard for people to like, there's not a lot we can do. It feels like we're powerless a lot of the time, right? It feels like, oh, what do I do? What do I do about Iran? I can't do anything about Iran. I can't do a lot about Cuba. I can't do much about Venezuela. I can't do anything about Minneapolis personally. It's like, what can you do? What can we collectively do? And so that's something they did out in Minneapolis is like, they got their community together and organized it so that when that happened, and my understanding is that they were already organized to a certain extent because of what happened with George Floyd.
Yeah.
Right. So they had some existing infrastructure there, but really it's the tale of indigenous peoples in the Americas is one of survival, of surviving and being resilient through serious systemic disruption and in the face of extermination policies. Like they've been trying to exterminate us for a long, long time. And so it's continuing that work. It's how do we make sure that our communities are together so that they survive and so that we can make sure we care for each other. Because I don't know when or if things will get better. I don't. I'm not like a political scientist. I don't have those levers. All I know is the same thing that my parents encountered in the American Indian movement. The way my dad tells it is everybody got together and they were doing all these protests and all this stuff. And those are important. Like you've got to fight too, right? Like Standing Rock type stuff, that's super important. But the real work is back at home in your communities to make the people strong, to make the people resilient, to make the people know each other and have kinship ties to each other so that, if something happens, we can support each other. What happens if somebody in our community gets taken? What do we do? How do we support them? Who knows the lawyer? Who knows, X, Y, and Z? So it's building those systems of mutual aid. And I don't have like all the answers for that. It's not really my purview. But for me and the work that I'm doing, which began prior to Donald Trump, so it's not necessarily in response, Donald Trump's second term rather, is we still have like intergenerational trauma. We still have all of these traumas that are happening. They're just creating more of it now. Like they've got kids in concentration camps in the South, is my understanding, is programs of intervention so that we can build social cohesion and community power. And so for me, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a political organizer. What I do know is how to wrestle. And I do know that done intentionally and with the right culture, you can take kids who otherwise might have just been couch potatoes because that's all they believe they could be, and you can get them in love with their body. And then who knows what cascading effect that has down the line. Who knows? So who knows what one child believing they can achieve can do for a community, right? Maybe someday they're an environmental lawyer. Maybe someday they're the lawyer who helps when the Gestapo comes, Right now it's kind of imminent on us, so we have to like fight the fight to an extent, but there's still this amount of work underneath that needs to happen because literally removing Donald Trump and removing Republicans from power and putting things back to say like the Joe Biden era, which would be a huge win. Let's not get that clouded, but that's not the end of struggle. That's not the end of settler colonialism in the Americas. That's not the end of Israel and Palestine. That's not the end of Cuban embargo. That's not the end of us meddling in Iran. It's just making it less. It's the severity of it, right? Yeah. It's the severity of it. Understanding that what's happening is not new. What's happening is fascism, and that America has always been a fascist state in some form or another. In terms of trying to exterminate people, in terms of all of that, it's just who has that been aimed at? And slowly it's being aimed at a wider range of people. Yeah. So again, it's the same lessons we learned in that Peacemaker story. It's being able to maintain a clear mind so you can make good decisions. It's building community power, and it's taking actions to do those things. So it's all that. It's all that same stuff.
Yeah. Well, as we've been considering all these different pieces, as we wrap up here, anything else that you want to add to tie us together, or connect any dots, or anything else that feels like it wants to be said here today?
No, not really. I wanted to talk about my program a little bit, but it doesn't feel like it's actually necessary for the moment. If people want to look at that, you can find us goodmindgrappling.com. You just look up Good Mind Grappling. But no, I think I've said the things I want to say regarding the Peacemaker story, regarding our relationship to settler colonialism and all that kind of stuff. So I appreciate this opportunity, and I know that I'm not like a preeminent scholar on any of this. I just have some lived experience. But I think it's useful, especially for young men, to think about their place in their community and what they can do to help others. Yeah. I think that's important.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about your program as well. And before we started recording, hours ago now, you mentioned how you'd been helping one young man, I think, in your community, and he had no interest in doing cartwheels or handsprings until you put down the structures in your gym, or maybe your wife did it, who's a gymnastics leader there.
Yeah, she did that.
Put down these handprints and set up some structures. And all of a sudden, when he walked into the space and those structures were there, the handprints, he just started doing cartwheels because it was the most intuitive thing in the world, even though he hadn't wanted to or hadn't been interested in weeks or months prior. And it felt like such a powerful example of how the structures in our communities dictate where young people go and what people do. And you have put together this program of Good Mind Grappling with your brother, which is such an incredible example of a healthy structure in a community to catch young people and give them a pathway into loving their bodies and being healthy community members. And I wondered if you would just describe what that program is, what you do, and if you have any needs or hopes moving forward for Good Mind Grappling.
Yeah, Good Mind Grappling is a project to address intergenerational trauma in Indigenous communities by providing youth with positive physical outlets, right? And so what we do, primarily through the sports of grappling and gymnastics, because my wife is a gymnastics instructor, and throughout my life, I've noted that gymnastics is like, it goes like this with wrestling, yeah? Because you got to control your own body. But what we do is we use a concept of like environmental design to drive skill development, to drive physical literacy, where a lot of times what you'll get is, especially in like a bad training hall, is you'll get the coach, they come in and they're like, okay, we're going to do this move. Here's the steps that you do. And it's like, they're teaching like the hook. You do the hook, you put your right hand here, you put your left hand there. When it's like these long steps, but there's no understanding built, right?
Yeah.
There's no understanding built. You just like rote memorization. It's like going into school and doing your times tables. There might be utility to that. I don't know. I don't know how about teaching mathematics, but I do know that when you're working with grapplers or you're working with sport, there's a lot about environmental design, right? So it's like you want them to understand the reasons they're doing the things they're doing so they can come up with creative solutions. So it's like learning about how we put the arm across the body or away from the body or in states of extension or flexion, and how that influences the ways we can control our opponent's rotation, the ways we can control their locomotion. Like this is stuff that I talk about more explicitly with like our teen and adult students. But with kids, it's like you got to make it simpler and like really simple cues, right? You make it simple and simple cues. You give them some like task-based games, and then you show them moves, but you show them the moves in the context of like, here's how it achieves the desired task. And then you have to have people in the room, right? Good partners who are better than you, partners who are learning, partners who are on the same level as you. It's like if you play chess and you only play chess with a low-level player, you can get away with a lot of mistakes that you can't get away with against a really, really good player. And so what you want to do is make sure that like the environment, because that's a different environment. Playing against somebody who's new at chess, you can do whatever, you can leave pieces hanging, versus somebody who's like a grandmaster, like you can't get away with anything. Everything's a blunder, right? So it's designing the environment so that rather than me having all of the power and instruction, and granted, I do have some level of power because I'm designing the environment,
Right.
I'm designing the environment. So like there is a level of power there, but I'm trying to get the kids to discover things for themselves and guide their learning process, right? So we do a lot of environmental design. And so a lot of that is you want to have the equipment or the structures that supports that. And kids bring their own thing to it, their own motivations, right? Some kids can take direct instruction very well. Some kids are very like bristle at it. So previously we're trying to get the kids to learn handstands and to do cartwheels, right? Because sometimes you got to invert on your hands, and definitely cartwheels are like really, really useful in wrestling. You got to be able to do a cartwheel, right? Sometimes you'll go to a gym and there's like this guy and he's like 260 and he's on TRT and he's like just super jacked. And they're like, yeah, let's do cartwheels on the mat. And he's just like, can't do it. And you're like, okay, you're strong, but you don't have a good relationship to your body. Anyway, previously we were like using a wall. We just had a wall and they would put their hands down and they'd come up to it and try to balance against the wall. And we'd support them and them learning, we had like parallels of building the strength in their shoulders, kind of scaffold them into that. And then the other one, we had a booster block, and they'd put their hands on the booster block, jump from one side to the other, right? And in our first class, like we have 3 different classes we run every night. The first one is like fundamentals, capital FUN, dementals. And it's meant for kids who are like younger, like even as young as 5, and they can't like focus entirely for the class, right? You can't like have them do an activity and make them stay focused the whole class. So we like put a bounce house and then a gymnastics circuit, and they do the gymnastics circuit, and we have them come in and we play some games and we go back out and oscillate between that. And so we had a young boy in that class, and I'm trying to get him to like do the activity of like, oh, put your hands on this booster block and jump over it. And he's just like, no, I don't want to be told what to do. I'm gonna keep playing how I play. I'll even play tag in the bounce house for 10 minutes just to be away from you trying to tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. So we get a grant to get some gymnastics equipment. One of the things my wife gets is these like little hands. You put them on the floor, you put them on because we have a carpeted surface. It's like a springboard floor.
Yep.
And there's a mat and then carpet on top of that mat. And so you can Velcro things to it. And so she Velcros the hands and the feet so that the kids will follow along, and they don't like, we can still show them how to do it. But this boy, he's running the circuit. I'm watching him. I see him get to the hands and he's like looking at them. And he just like puts his hands there. He does a handstand, forward rolls out of it. Okay, goes back, does a handstand again, shoulder rolls out of it. And then he goes, okay. And he goes to the next thing, and he just does a cartwheel. He just like does a cartwheel. I'm like, oh, okay. So this boy could always do a cartwheel physically. He just didn't want to, you know? Yep. It was the first time I'd seen him do a cartwheel ever, you know? It was like, oh, because like a lot of the times it's like finding what is the environmental stimulus or the cue that's going to get someone to do the thing. You know, some other kids it'll work, some kids it won't. Yeah, that's why it's like when you have a little kid, you want them to experience a wide variety of environments. Put them outside in the woods, you know, have them in a gymnastics gym, have them go swimming, have them dance, you know, have them experience a wide variety of things so they learn a wide variety of skills. And that's kind of what we do is we use that. We use environmental design so that kids can develop physical literacy, and then also for them to develop social emotional skills because they're developing relationships to my brother and I and my wife, our coaches as mentors, right? Where we try to channel them toward self-regulation, toward being able to come back from failure, as well as a relationship to the mat, to the equipment. They're learning how to move their body through space, and a relationship to their peers. And so one of the things that's unique about grappling and grappling arts is the physical touch element. Because when you do physical activity, you know, you get endorphins and serotonin and all those really good neuroreceptors that make us feel good and help us keep a calm mind. But in grappling, you get oxytocin release, which is a hormone associated with the development of empathy and understanding the emotions of others. It's a bonding hormone. So we're trying, it's like hugging. Like when I was training at TriStar, we had a lady who was like taking photos, and she's like, you know, you guys are like extreme professional cuddlers. Like, yes, that's exactly what it is. It's to hug and cuddle and I want. It's that touch. And so when we're trying to think about building kinship bonds and building relationship, they're experiencing this oxytocin release inside of a game that's inherently about conflict, right? Because it's a martial art. It's inherently about conflict.
Yep.
And so it's about learning how to navigate conflict and build a relationship with each other. And so that's the work we do here is we're trying to use sport as a physical and mental health intervention in the community, right? We're not the only ones focused on intergenerational trauma in the community. It's well known in Indigenous circles that intergenerational trauma is a huge deal. It's just for me, I'm not like a licensed therapist. I'm not a deep holder of traditional knowledge. You know, I have some, but I'm not like an expert, you know. But what I am is a wrestler and a coach and a youth development professional who this is how I can contribute. This is how I know to contribute to my community. And so this year in our gym, we've served, well, last year. So these numbers are for 2025 because we're in early 26. But in 2025, we served 160 individual youth for at least one session at our gym. In the schools, we introduced 1,297 kids to wrestling, to the sport. We introduced them, 1,297. We had over 40 kids in the gymnastics program. We had 20 and then 20. But when we set up the registration form, we had 60 kids who want to apply. And this is for girls only gymnastics. So when we open up for boys too, wow, like we're going to have a lot of people want to do gymnastics, you know. We had an open house the other day. We had 45 kids there. We've had we get like 19, 20 kids a night now. You know, like it's grown. Like in previous times when I've talked to you, you know, sometimes I've had imposter syndrome because I'll get like one or two kids. And I'm like, oh, is this good enough? Is it, you know? But as we've been churning along, we're getting like increased attendance and participation. We even had a Pee-wee wrestling program where some of the kids got to compete. We had they're like 8 years old. We had 5 of them qualify for the state tournament, and these are kids we're training them, and it's like recreational. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's recreational. We're not trying to win. We're just teaching you what we know. And then in the high school level, our local high school, Salmon River, they've never had a wrestling team before. And this year, with our support and supporting their coaches there, we have a men's varsity wrestling team for the first time ever on the res. And next year, there'll be a women's team. So it's this thing where we're developing in our community with the intention to empower the physical and mental health of our youth using a long-term athlete development pathway that's largely recreational, but for the kids who, once they hit 13 and even younger, maybe they want to compete, they can compete. And then for adults, they can come back and mentor, or they can do stay involved in our jiu-jitsu programs. We have fathers on the mats with their sons, mothers with their daughters. And, we got one guy who he used to wrestle in Pennsylvania, and now he's got 6 kids in our program. He's on the mats with them. So it's a lot of building that intergenerational kinship bonds and community with each other and with the greater community. And so for us, we're just trying to expand that. I wanna be able to do this in Akwesasne and then carry it once we've shown the effectivity of our model here, be able to do that in other communities. So in terms of needs, we're always looking for support, whether that's volunteering, whether that's, I know on this thing, people won't be able to physically volunteer, but and donations as well. You can find us on our website, goodmindgrappling.com. Right now, our American side PayPal has been shut down for some reason, but you can donate through our Canadian fiscal sponsor. But just any support we can have for our work is very helpful. Right now, It's just me, my brother, and my wife, Angèle, and we're working on expanding to having more coaching so we can work with more kids.
Yeah.
Right? More coaches, assistant coaches, maybe some coaches in training, some of our 16-year-old high school girls and boys, they can, come in, we can teach them a bit. And then they can, get a little bit of pay and have a summer job. So just things like that, really. Working with, there's an organization called Connected North that we're trying to work with. They do like Zoom calls to classrooms in northern communities, remote northern communities.
Oh,
so we're building a relationship with them to see if we can't do classes with them through their model and potentially start some wrestling programs. There's one in Cambridge Bay. You look up Cambridge Bay Wrestling Club. All of these northern Inuit communities, they're experiencing, especially in the young people, a suicide epidemic. And so this group, Chris and Paula Crooks, they're both African American, but they're not African American, they're Canadian, but they're Black. And their son married up there, Cambridge Bay. And they have long history of being teachers in inner city schools with kids, who have troubles. And so they went up there, they found this Cambridge Bay Wrestling Club, and they've been having really good success stories of kids who were suicidal or dealing with mental health, and then those kids doing well, and they had their first Canada Games champion a couple of years back. So it's developing that out, where we want to take the sport of wrestling, we want to take grappling, we want to take gymnastics, and we want to use it in a mentorship model to heal and strengthen our communities. And that's kind of what we do here. And so that's kind of in line with all the things we've been talking about. That's just how I embody it in my life, in practice with my community, and try to make that actually happen. So I want to thank you for the ability to come on here and share my story and talk about my program with your audience. And you've been very whenever I go up to Maine, I'm I want to see there. I want to go see them. And it's Angèle has all her friends, and I'm just secretly waiting to see you, So we have good conversations. We have good conversations about, about these topics. And I really appreciate that work that you do.
I really appreciate you too. And every time I see you, I appreciate you and just love you even more. You're doing incredible work and it's an inspiration. And anybody who's listened to this long, you've listened because you also see the value in what Thomas is doing. So I invite you to go to goodmindgrappling.com and support them, give them a little bit of donation for this incredible gift of Thomas's time, because I asked you for a long block to have this good, serious conversation, and you found the time to give it to me. And it means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to the audience. So thank you again for your generosity and for all of your work. You're an absolute inspiration. And you're serving upstate New York right now, is that right?
In Akwesasne. My home community is in Akwesasne, which is in upstate New York. Part of it's in New York, part of it is in Ontario, and there's a portion in Quebec. Oh. So we are kind of bisected by all of these border lines. It's made it real interesting. We haven't quite had any like major ICE activity up here. We do have border patrol agents and all that. There's been like one or two incidents that like haven't gotten hairy, but like seem like they're, so we're kind of safe here for now. Yeah. But we'll see what happens that way. But yeah, that's where we're located. Hour south of Ottawa, hour west of Montreal. So
if you're in that area and you want to donate time or volunteer or potentially get involved, then you can get in touch with Thomas. Yeah, and again, thank you so much for sharing that story, and your words have meant a lot, and I know that they'll have ripples out and continue the good work that you're doing in Good Mind Grappling these days. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.